Hello, everyone. Hello. Oh my gosh. There we go. Hello. How's it going? Happy, happy day. It was extremely cold extremely cold, as in I want it to be spring and it keeps being terrible. So it was like in the high 30s, low 40s this morning, and super gray, cloudy. It was raining, which was really nice to just like lay in bed and listen to the rain for a little bit. But now it's like really sunny and you can see all of the like leaves on the trees starting to grow and stuff, and it's super deceiving. I want it to be way nicer than what it actually is right now because it's still in the 40s, but it just looks like it could be like in the 60s. And that's all I want right now. It's fine. It's fine. I took a nap today, thinking that it would like energize me more, which I do feel much more awake than I did earlier. And I have some very flat ginger ale. So, who's winning at life? This this gal. All right. Reading updates. I am reading tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow on during reading sprints. So every Monday and every Friday morning from 9 a.m. Central, I do reading sprints live on Twitch here. And I'm reading tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow, and I'm really enjoying it so far. It's about these two people who were friends when they were younger. They met in a hospital for different circumstances, and their friendship was severed, and they've reunited in college. And they're at different schools, one's at Harvard, one's at MIT, and they decided they are going to make a video game together. And so they do. And it becomes, this isn't a spoiler because it says it on the back, but it becomes insanely popular, crazy popular, and they are uh like contracted to make a second one, and so they also make a second one. And it's really good because they're both, in their early 20s, and so like dealing with the fame, but also trying to, I don't know, like one of the people is a female, and like being a game developer as a female is very different than if you're a male. So, like, navigating that is also in this. And the way that it's written is it's written in different parts. So the first part was called Sick Kids. The second part is called Influences, and it's about like the influences that influenced their first game. And then this one is currently called Unfair Games, which is the name of the company that they are running. And it's really good. And every once in a while, you get flashbacks. But you also get flash forwards, I guess, and like interviews that they have done. And it's interesting to see the projection of where their relationship is going. So that's kind of cool too. Hello, Star. Thank you so much for contributing to Sunday's stream. Thank you. And yes, you must treat Lil Bean when you're here. Lil Bean expects it at this point. Hey, Wadsworth, how's it going? So, I am enjoying this. Again, I say this all the time, but I'm going to say it again. I'm a huge proponent of large type. This is the large type edition for a couple reasons. One, it helps your eyesight. um, Don Quixote has super tiny print, and it helps having like a little bit of a break. And it's also like if you get it at a library, it's also a shorter wait typically. So you don't have to, hot tip, you don't have to wait as long. There you go. Thank you so much for contributing to Sunday's stream. Where are we at on that? Let's see. I don't even know. I haven't checked in a while. We are at 36% raised. Excellent. So that's another hour and a half that's been added. Cool. So right now, I'll be streaming, if nothing changes, for 5.5 hours, which we know it will change. Oh, yes, please do. Have a good shower. Okay, let's see. Today, Don Quixote. I looked and we've already been reading Don Quixote for 7 sessions, which is wild to me. I mean, this is definitely going to be the largest book that we've read so far, but it's just insane. Like, we're not even halfway. Are we even a third? Okay, we're we may or may not be a third. But it's just wild that like on page over 300 we we're not halfway. Okay, let's see. So today we are going to start with chapter 37. Let's see if we remember. Oh, yes. Okay, last time. So they're all at the inn. So all. That means Cardenio. It means, oh man, what's her name? I don't remember her name. I do not remember her name. It's not Lucinda. It's craps. I don't remember. Okay, well, she's there as well. And the barber, the priest, Don Quixote, Sancho Panza. Don Quixote is sleeping, and they all decide that they are going to read this novel that has been left behind. And there was criticism for it because it's a like a break in the action, and I totally understand that because it definitely does break the action of what's happening. But we're reading this novel, everybody's enthralled by it, and at the end of it, there are a couple of visitors who are very mysterious who hop into the inn. And lo and behold, who should it be? It's Lucinda and Don Fernando, who are people that have very much been entangled with Cardenio and that person that I can't remember her name. Um, so that's kind of cool that that storyline is sort of being wrapped up. We've had Cardenio and his story for a while now, so it is kind of cool that it's like, all right, we did it. It's here. It's finalized. You get your story tied up in a bow, you know. So that's kind of nice. So yeah, so basically we ended up with Lucinda professing her love for Cardenio and Don Fernando and what's her face going to end up together. And I think that's right where we left off. Dorothea. That's her name. Her name is Dorothea. Mhm. Yes. And Dorothea is pretending, I forgot to throw this in because it's going to be immediately pertinent, but Dorothea is pretending to be a princess from a faraway land so that Don Quixote, that's how they lured Don Quixote out of the mountains, was she had this plight with a giant and she needed help, and only Don Quixote, who she's heard of from, you know, countries and countries away, can help her. So on the way to her place, Maconacone, on the way there, they are going to stop at Don Quixote's village, and the plan is that the barber and the priest will nab him, I guess, and like keep him there instead of him traveling constantly. Will it work? Let's find out. Okay, chapter 37, in which the history of the famous Princess Miconacona continues, along with other diverting adventures. The barber is totally just jealous of the sweet helmet. You're absolutely right. Sancho listened to all of this with a very sorrowful spirit, for he saw that his hopes for a noble title were disappearing and going up in smoke, and that the lovely Princess Maconacona had turned into Dorotea, and the giant into Don Fernando, and that his master was in a deep, sound sleep, unaware of everything that had happened. Dorotea could not be certain she had not dreamed her great joy. Cardenio was in the same frame of mind, and Lucinda had the same thought. Don Fernando thanked heaven for its mercy in extricating him from the intricate labyrinth in which he had been on the verge of losing both his good name and his soul. In short, all the people in the inn were pleased, rejoicing at the happy outcome of such complex and desperate affairs. The priest, a judicious man, put the final touch on everything by congratulating them on all the happiness each had achieved. But the one who was happiest and most joyful was the innkeeper's wife, because Cardenio and the priest had promised to pay her for all the damage and all the costs she had incurred on Don Quixote's account. Only Sancho, as we have said, was sorrowful, dejected, and sad, and so, with a melancholy expression, he went in to see his master, who had just awakened, and said, "Your Grace, Señor Sorrowful Face, can sleep all you want to now and not worry about killing any giant or returning the princess to her kingdom. It's all over and done with." "I certainly believe that," responded Don Quixote, "because with that giant I have had the most uncommon and furious battle I think I shall ever have in all my days, and with a single downstroke, smash! I knocked his head to the ground, and so much blood poured out of him that it ran in streams along the floor as if it were water." That was something else. So there was a break in the novel that they were reading, in which, in his semi-sleep stage, Don Quixote was fighting a giant, which was really just a red wineskin, and so, like, the blood that he's talking about was just red wine. And the decapitated head was just the, like, wineskin sack that it was in. "As if it were red wine, is what your Grace should say," responded Sancho, "because I want your Grace to know, in case you don't already, that the dead giant is a slashed wineskin, his blood, the 6 arrobas of red wine contained in its belly, and the head you cut off is the person who bore me. Damn it to hell." And there's a note after arrobas, and it says an extremely variable liquid measure ranging from 2.6 to 3.6 gallons. It is also a dry measure equivalent to 25 pounds. "Madman, what are you saying?" replied Don Quixote. "Have you lost your mind?" "Get up, your Grace," said Sancho, "and you'll see what you've won and what we have to pay, and you'll see the queen transformed into an ordinary lady named Dorothea, and other changes that will amaze you, if you can see them for what they are." "I shall not marvel at any of it," replied Don Quixote, "because if you remember, the last time we were here I told you that all the things that occurred in this place were works of enchantment, and it would not surprise me if the same were true now." "I'd believe everything," responded Sancho, "if my tossing in the blanket was that kind of thing, but it wasn't. It was real and true, and I saw the innkeeper who's here today holding a corner of the blanket and tossing me up to the sky with lots of enthusiasm and energy, and as much laughter as strength. And though I am a simple man and a sinner, as far as I'm concerned, when you can recognize people, there's no enchantment at all. Just a lot of bruising and a lot of bad luck." "Well, then, God will remedy everything," said Don Quixote. "Give me my clothes and let me go out there, for I wish to see the changes and transformations you have mentioned." Twilight Stone, thank you for contributing to Sunday's stream. Good to see you. Sancho handed him his clothes, and while he was dressing, the priest told Don Fernando and the others about the madness of Don Quixote, and the stratagem they had used to take him away from Peña Pobre, which is where he imagined he was, brought there by his lady's scorn. He also related almost all the adventures that Sancho had recounted, which both astonished them and made them laugh, for they thought that everyone thought what everyone thought. It was the strangest kind of madness that had ever afflicted an irrational mind. The priest added that the fortunate change in Señora Dorothea's circumstances prevented their plan from going forward, and it would be necessary to devise and invent another, so they could take him home. Cardenio offered to continue what they had already begun, and have Lucinda act the part played by Dorothea. No, said Don Fernando, by no means. I want Dorothea to go on with the fiction. This good gentleman's village is probably not very far from here, and I would be happy if a cure could be found for him. It's no more than 2 days' travel from here. Even if it were more, I would be glad to make the trip for the sake of so good a work. At this moment, Don Quixote came out, leaning on his branch, or lance, and wearing all his armor, the helmet of Membrino, though battered, on his head, and his shield on his arm. Don Fernando and the others marveled at the strange appearance of Don Quixote, his dry, sallow face that was at least half a league long, his ill-matched weapons, and his solemn demeanor. They remained silent, waiting to see what he would say, and he, very gravely and serenely, turned his eyes toward the beautiful Dorothea and said, I have been informed, O beauteous lady, by this my squire, that your greatness has been annihilated, and your person undone, because from the queen and great lady you once were, you have turned into an ordinary damsel. If this has occurred by order of the necromancer king, your father, fearful I would not give you all the assistance you needed and deserved, then I say that he did not and does not know the half of what he should, and is not well versed in chivalric histories. If he had read them as attentively as I, and spent the same amount of time reading them as I, he would have found on every page how knights with less fame than mine had successfully concluded more difficult enterprises, finding it no great matter to kill some insignificant giant, no matter how arrogant, because not many hours ago I found myself and him with him, and I prefer to remain silent, because I do not wish anyone to say that I am lying. But time, which reveals all things, will disclose this truth to us when we least expect it. You found yourself with 2 wineskins. Not a giant, said the innkeeper. Don Fernando ordered him to be quiet and not, under any circumstances, to interrupt Don Quixote. And Don Quixote continued, saying, I say then, O high and disinherited lady, that if for the reason I have mentioned your father has brought about this metamorphosis in your person, then you should place no trust in him, because there is no danger on earth through which my sword does not clear a path. With it, in a very short days, I shall send the head of your enemy rolling on the ground, and place on yours its rightful crown. Don Quixote stopped speaking, and waited for the princess to respond, and she, knowing Don Fernando's determination that the deception should continue until Don Quixote had been brought home, responded with grace and solemnity. Whoever told you, O valiant knight of the sorrowful face, that I had changed and altered my being, did not tell you the truth, because I am today the same woman I was yesterday. It is true that some alteration has been caused in me by certain fortunate events that have given me the best I could desire, but I have not, for that reason, stopped being who I was before, and I still have the same intention I have always had, to avail myself of the valor of your valiant and invenerable arm. And there's a note after invenerable, and it says, Martin de Ricoeur indicates that Dorothea uses this term mockingly. Therefore, Señor, let your goodness restore honor to the father who sired me, and consider him a wise and prudent man, for with his knowledge he found so easy and true a way to remedy my misfortune that I believe, Señor, if it were not for you, I would have enjoyed the good fortune I have now. What I say regarding this matter is true, as most of these gentlefolk here present can testify. All that remains is for us to start out tomorrow, because we could not travel very far today, and as for the other good outcomes that I hope to see, I shall leave them to God and to the valor of your heart. This is what the clever Dorothea said, and when Don Quixote heard it, he turned to Sancho, and showing signs of great anger, he said, I say to you now, wretched Sancho, that you are the greatest scoundrel in all of Spain. Tell me, you worthless thief, Did you not just say to me that the princess had been transformed into a damsel named Dorothea, and that the head I believe I cut off a giant was the whore that bore you? All right. And so much other foolishness that it caused me the greatest confusion I have ever felt in all the days of my life, I swear, and he looked up to heaven and clenched his teeth, that I am about to do so much damage to you that from this day forth it will put sense back into the heads of all the lying squires in the world who serve knights-errant. Your grace should calm down, señor, responded Sancho, because it might be true I made a mistake about the change in the Señora Princess Micomicona. But as for the giant's head, or I should say, the slashed wineskins, and the blood being red wine, by God, I'm not mistaken, because the wounded wineskins are there, at the head of your grace's bed, and the red wine has formed a lake in the room. If you don't believe me, the proof is in the pudding. I mean, you'll have your proof when his grace the innkeeper asks you to pay damages for everything. As for the rest of it, my lady the queen being the same as she was before, that makes me happy, because then I'll get what's due me, along with every mother's son. Pudding. I'll tell you now, Sancho, said Don Quixote, that you are, forgive me, a dolt, and let us say no more. Enough. Enough, said Don Fernando. Let there be no more talk of this, since my lady the princess says she will set out tomorrow, because it is too late today. Let it be so, and we can spend tonight in pleasant conversation, and when day breaks we shall all accompany Señor Don Quixote, because we want to witness the valiant and extraordinary deeds he will perform in the course of this great enterprise that he has undertaken. It is I who should serve and accompany you, responded Don Quixote, and I am most grateful for the favor you do me, and the good opinion you have of me, which I shall strive to make true, or it will cost me my life, and even more, if anything can cost me more. Many words of praise and many offers of service were exchanged by Don Quixote and Don Fernando, but silence was imposed by a traveler who came into the inn just then. His clothing indicated that he was a Christian recently arrived from Moorish lands, for he was dressed in a short blue woolen tunic with half sleeves and no collar, breeches of blue linen, and a cap of the same color. He wore ankle boots, the color of dates, and a Moorish scimitar hung from the strap across his chest. Then a woman came in after him, riding on a donkey and dressed in the Moorish fashion, her face hidden by a veil. She wore a small brocade cap and a long cloak that covered her from her shoulders to her feet. The man's appearance was robust and attractive, his age a little over 40, his face rather dark, with a long mustache and a carefully trimmed beard. In short, his bearing revealed that if he had been well dressed, he would have been deemed noble and high-born. When he entered, he asked for a room, and when he was told there was none at the inn, he seemed troubled. He approached the woman whose dress made her seem Moorish, and lifted her down in his arms. Lucinda, Dorothea, the innkeeper's wife, her daughter, and Maritornes, drawn by her clothing, which seemed strange to them, for they had not seen its like before, gathered around the Moorish woman, and Dorothea, who was always charming, courteous, and clever, thought that both she and the man who accompanied her were distressed by the lack of a room, and she said, "Do not be troubled, Señora, at not finding suitable accommodation here, for it is almost never found in inns. Even so, if you would like to stay with us," and she pointed to Lucinda, "perhaps you will find a better welcome here than elsewhere on your journey." The veiled lady did not say anything in response, but she rose from the chair where she was sitting, crossed both hands on her bosom, inclined her head, and bowed to show her thanks. From her silence they imagined that she undoubtedly was a Moor and could not speak Christian. Just then the captive, who had been attending to other matters, approached. and seeing that all the women were standing around his companion, but that she did not respond to the statements directed to her, he said, "Señoras, this maiden barely understands my language and does not know how to speak any other except the one spoken in her own country, and this is why she has not replied and will not reply to the questions you have asked her." There is a note after just then the captive, and it says, "It seems likely that the earlier description of the character as a Christian recently arrived from Moorish lands means that he could only be a former prisoner, although the story of his captivity, another interpolated novel, does not begin until chapter 39. Gotta wait. You gotta wait for the backstory. "Oh, we have not asked her anything," responded Lucinda, "but we have offered her our companionship for the night, and a place in the room where we will sleep, and as much comfort as it is possible to find here, for we desire and are bound to serve all strangers who need our help, especially if the one in need is a woman." "On her behalf and on mine," responded the captive, "I kiss your hands, Señora, and I certainly esteem your offer as it deserves to be esteemed. On an occasion such as this, and from persons such as yourselves, that merit is very high indeed." "Tell me, Señor," said Dorothea, "is this lady a Christian or a Moor? Her dress and her silence make us think she is what she would rather... Her dress and her silence make us think she is what we would rather she was not." "She is a Moor in her dress and body, but in her soul she is a devout Christian, because she has a very strong desire to be one." "Then she isn't baptized?" replied Lucinda. "We have not had the opportunity for that," responded the captive, "since we left Algiers, her home and native land, and until now she has not been in mortal danger that would oblige her to be baptized without first knowing all the ceremonies required by our Holy Mother Church. But God willing, she will soon be baptized with all the decorum her station deserves, for it is higher than that indicated by her attire, or mine." With these words, he woke everyone's desire to know who the Moorish lady was, and who the captive. But no one wished to ask any questions just then, since it was clearly time to follow them. My gosh, I am just butchering it today. Let's start over. With these words, he woke everyone's desire to know who the Moorish lady was, and who the captive, but no one wished to ask any questions just then, since it was clearly time to allow them to rest rather than ask about their lives. Dorothea took the stranger by the hand, led her to a seat next to her own, and asked that she remove the veil. The Moorish lady looked at the captive as if asking him to tell her what was being said, and what she should do. He told her, in Arabic, that she was being asked to remove her veil, and that she should do so. And she lifted her veil and revealed a face so beautiful that Dorothea thought her more beautiful than Lucinda, and Lucinda thought her more beautiful than Dorothea, and everyone present realized that if any beauty could equal that of those two women, it was the Moorish lady's, and there were even some who thought hers superior in certain details. And since it is the prerogative and charm of beauty to win hearts and attract affection, everyone surrendered to the desire to serve and cherish the beautiful Moor. Don Fernando asked the captive what her name was, and he replied that it was Lila Zoraida, and as soon as the Moor heard this, she understood what had been asked, and she hastened to say, with much distress, but great charm, "No, no, Zoraida, Maria, Maria." In this way she indicated that her name was Maria, not Zoraida. And there is a note here after Lila. It says the word means Señora, or lady. These words and the great emotion with which the Moorish lady said them brought more than one tear to the eyes of some who were listening, especially the women, who are by nature tender-hearted and compassionate. Lucinda embraced her with a great deal of affection, saying, "Yes, yes, Maria, Maria," to which the Moor responded, "Yes, yes, Maria, Zoraida Maconge," a word that means no. By this time night had fallen, and on the orders of those who had accompanied Don Fernando, the innkeeper had been diligent and careful in preparing the best supper he could. When it was time to eat, they all sat at a long refractory table, for there were no round or square ones in the inn, and they gave the principal seat at the head of the table to Don Quixote, although he tried to refuse it, and then he wanted Señora Micomicona at his side, for he was her protector. Then came Lucinda and Zoraida, and facing them Don Fernando and Cardenio, and then the captive and the other gentlemen, and on the lady's side the priest and the barber. And in this manner they ate very happily, even more so when Don Quixote stopped eating, moved by a spirit similar to the one that had moved him to speak at length when he ate with the goatherds, and he began saying, "Truly, señores, if one considers it carefully, great and wonderful are the things seen by those who profess the order of knight-errantry. For who in this world, coming through the door of this castle and seeing us as we appear now, would judge and believe that we are who we are? Who would say that this lady at my side is the great queen we all know she is, and that I am the knight of the sorrowful face whose name is on the lips of fame? There can be no doubt that this art and profession exceeds all others invented by men, for the more dangerous something is, the more it should be esteemed. Anyway, away with those who say that letters are superior to arms, for I shall tell them, whoever they may be, that they do not know what they are saying." There's a note after letters are superior to arms, and it says, "The debate between arms and letters, that is, the life of a soldier compared to the life of a cleric or scholar, a frequent literary topic in Europe during the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, was at least as popular as the theme of the Golden Age, the subject of Don Quixote's discourse, when he shared a meal with the goatherds." The reason usually given by these people, and the one on which they rely, is that the works of the spirit are greater than those of the body, and that arms are professed by the body alone, as if this profession were the work of laborers, for which one needs nothing more than strength. Or if in the profession we call arms, those of us who practice it do not perform acts of fortitude that demand great intelligence to succeed, or as if the courage of a warrior who leads an army or defends a city under siege does not make use of his spirit as well as his body. If you do not agree, consider that knowing the enemy's intentions, surmising his plans and stratagems, foreseeing difficulties, preventing harm, all of these are actions of mind in which the body plays no part at all. If it is true that arms require spirit, as do letters, let us see which of the two spirits, that of the lettered man or that of the warrior, is more active. This can be known by the purpose and aim of each, for an intention must be more highly esteemed if it has at its object a nobler end. The purpose and aim of letters, and I do not speak now of divine letters, whose purpose is to bring and guide souls to heaven, so eternal in end cannot be equaled by any other. I am speaking of human letters, whose purpose is to maintain distributive justice and give each man what is his, and make certain that good laws are obeyed, a purpose certainly that is generous and high and worthy of great praise, but not so meritorious as arms, whose purpose and objective is peace, which is the greatest good that man can desire in his life. And so, the first good news that the world and men received was brought by angels on the night that was our day, when they sang in the air, "Glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace, goodwill towards men." And the greeting that the best teacher on earth and in heaven taught his disciples and followers was that when they entered a house they should say, "Peace be in this house." And often he said to them, "My peace I give unto you, my peace I leave with you. Peace be with you, as if it were a precious jewel when given and offered by that hand, a jewel without which there can be no good on earth or in heaven. This peace is the true purpose of war, and saying arms is the same as saying war. Accepting it is true that the purpose of war is peace, which is greater than the purpose of letters, let us turn now to the physical hardships of the lettered man and those of the man who professes arms, and see which is greater. In this manner, and with these rational arguments, Don Quixote continued his discourse, and no one listening to him at that moment could think of him as a madman. Rather, since most were gentlemen engaged in the practice of arms, they were very pleased to listen. And he went on, saying, I say, then, that the hardships of the student are these, principally poverty, not because they are poor, but to make this case as extreme as possible. And having said that he suffers poverty, it seems to me that there is nothing more to say about this bad luck, because the man who is poor has nothing that is good. This poverty is suffered in its various forms, in hunger, cold, and nakedness, and sometimes all of them together. Even so, his poverty is not so great that he does not eat, although the meal may be a little later than usual, or may be the leftovers of the rich, and his greatest misery is what students call among themselves going for soup. And they do not lack someone else's brazier or hearth, and if it does not warm them, at least it lessens the cold, and at night they sleep under a blanket. And there's a note after going for soup, and it says, a phrase that means going to convents and monasteries for the soup that is distributed to the poor. I do not wish to discuss other trivial matters such as the lack of shirts and a shortage of shoes, and clothing that is scant and threadbare, or the relish with which they gorge themselves when fortune offers them a feast. Along this rough and difficult road that I have described, they stumble and fall, pick themselves up and fall again, until they reach the academic title they desire. Once this is acquired and they have passed through these shawls, these Silas and Charbdises, that is not how you say that word, as if carried on the wings of good fortune, we have seen many who command and govern the world from a chair, their hunger turned into a full belly, their cold into comfort, their nakedness into finery, and their straw mat into linen and damask sheets, the just reward for their virtue. But their hardships, measured against and compared to those of a soldier and warrior, fall far behind, as I shall relate to you now. And that was the end of chapter 37. Okay, so what happened? Sancho Panza tells Don Quixote that it was not all a lie, but that now there is no princess. She's back to being Dorothea. There was no giant that he slayed. It was just a wineskin. And in the meantime, Don Fernando is telling Dorothea that yes, she needs to continue this ruse. She needs to stay the princess, and we need to get Don Quixote help. Like, whatever will help him. If going to the village is going to help him, we can do the couple days journey. So Don Quixote comes out. Dorothea is acting like the princess. Don Quixote is mad at Sancho, per usual. And then he starts going on this this diatribe between, scholars and people who take up arms, that sort of thing. He was half asleep, and it was dark, and for, like, in his mind, everything has to do with knights. So when he, like, sliced the wineskin, which is, like, higher up in the inn that he's in, and it started, like, bleeding, in his mind, it just became that's what it was. But yeah, like, hearing that, you would totally think, that makes no sense. How? Also, hello. All right, chapter 38, which tells of the curious discourse on arms and letters given by Don Quixote. Don Quixote continued, saying, "We began with the student and the forms of his poverty. Now let us see if the soldier is richer, and we shall see that no one in his poverty is as poor as he, for he depends on his miserable pay, which comes late or never, or on whatever he can steal with his own hands at a great risk to his life and conscience. Sometimes he is so naked that a slashed and torn doublet is both uniform and shirt, and in the middle of winter, in an empty field, the breath from his mouth is his only protection against the inclemencies of heaven. And since that breath comes from an empty place, I consider it certain that it must come out cold, contradicting the laws of nature. But wait for night to fall, when he can make up for all these discomforts in the bed that awaits him, which will never sin by being too narrow unless he makes it so. For he can measure out as many feet of earth as he desires, and toss and turn to his heart's content without fear of wrinkling the sheets. Then, after this, the day and hour arrive when he receives the degree his profession offers, the day of battle. There he will receive his tasseled academic cap, made of bandages to heal a bullet wound, perhaps one that has passed through his temple or will leave him with a ruined arm or leg. If this does not happen, and merciful heaven protects him and keeps him whole and alive, it may be that he will remain in the same poverty as before. And he will have to go through one engagement after another, one battle after another, and emerge victorious from all of them in order to prosper only a little. But these miracles are not seen very often. But tell me, senores, if you have considered it, how many more perish in war than profit from it? No doubt you will respond that there is no comparison, that the number of dead cannot be counted, and those who have been rewarded and survived can be counted in 3 digits and never reach 1,000. All of this is the opposite of what happens to lettered men, for with their fees, not to mention the bribes they receive, they have enough to get by, so that even though the hardship of a soldier is greater, his reward is much smaller. But one can respond to this by saying that it is easier to reward 2,000 lettered men than 30,000 soldiers, because the first are rewards by position that of necessity must be given to those in their profession, and the latter cannot be rewarded except by the very wealth that belongs to the lord they serve. And this, being impossible, strengthens my argument. But let us leave this aside, for it is a labyrinth difficult to leave, and return to the preeminence of arms over letters, a question that has not yet been resolved, since each side presents its own arguments. Among them is the claim that without letters arms could not be sustained, because war only has laws to which it is subject, and laws are subsumed under what we are called letters and lettered men. The reply of arms to this is that laws cannot be sustained without arms, because with arms nations are defended, kingdoms maintained, cities defended, roads made secure, seas cleared of pirates. In short, if not for arms, nations, kingdoms, monarchies, cities, roads, and sea lanes would be subject to the hardship and confusion that war brings for as long as it lasts, and has the freedom to exercise its privileges and impose its violence. It is a demonstrable truth that whatever costs more is valued, and should be valued, more highly. To become distinguished in letters cost time, sleepless nights, hunger, nakedness, headaches, bouts of indigestion, and other things of the sort, some of which I have already mentioned. But to become a good soldier requires everything required of a student, but to so much higher a degree that there can be no comparison, because at every step the soldier risks losing his life. How can the fear of want and poverty that troubles a student ever equal the fear of the soldier who, finding himself besieged in a fortress, or keeping watch or standing guard at a drawbridge or watchtower, hears his enemies mining their way toward him, and he cannot leave for any reason or flee the danger that threatens him. All he can do is inform his captain of the situation so that he can remedy it with countermines, and he must be quiet, fearing, and waiting for the moment when he will suddenly fly up to the clouds without wings, or plunge down to the abyss against his will. And if this seems an insignificant danger, let us see if it is equaled or surpassed when the prows of two galleys collide in the middle of the wide sea, for when they lock and grapple, the soldier is left with no more than 2 feet of plank on the ram of the ship. Despite this, seeing that he has in front of him as many ministers of death threatening him as there are artillery cannons aimed at him from the other side, only a lance's throw away, and seeing that at the first misstep he will visit the deep bosom of Neptune, despite this, with an intrepid heart, carried by the honor that urges him on, he makes himself the target of all their volleys and attempts to cross that narrow passage to the enemy vessel. And the most astounding thing is that no sooner does one man fall, not to rise again until the world comes to an end, than another takes his place. And if he, too, falls into the sea that waits like an enemy, there is another, and another who follows him, and their depths come one after the other, without pause. No greater valor and daring can be found in all the perils of war. Happy were those blessed times that tacked the horrifying fury of the diabolical instruments of artillery, whose inventor, in my opinion, is in hell, receiving the reward for his accursed invention, which allows an ignoble and cowardly hand to take the life of a valiant knight, so that not knowing how it comes, or from where, a stray shot is fired into the courage and spirit that inflame and animate a brave heart, sent by one who perhaps fled in fear at the bright flare when the damned machine just discharged it, and it cuts off and ends in an instant the thoughts and life of one who deserved so to enjoy many more long years. When I consider this, I am prepared to say that it grieves my very soul, and that I have taken up the profession of knight-errant in an age of despicable as the one we live in now, for although no danger can cause me to fear, it still fills me with misgivings to think that powder and tin may deprive me of the opportunity to become famous and renowned throughout the known world for the valor of my arms and the sharp edge of my sword. But God's will be done, for I shall be highly esteemed if I succeed in my purpose, for having confronted greater dangers than any faced by the knights-errant of old. Don Quixote gave this long discourse while the others were eating, and he forgot to bring a single mouthful of food to his lips, although Sancho Panza told him several times that he should eat, and that later there would be time to say all he wanted to say. Those who listened to him were overwhelmed again with pity at seeing that a man who apparently was intelligent and rational in all other matters could lose those faculties completely when it was a question of his accursed and bedeviled chivalry. The priest said that he was correct in everything he had said in favor of arms, and that he, though lettered and a graduate of the university, was of the same opinion. They finished supper, the table was cleared, and while the innkeeper's wife, her daughter, and Maritornes prepared Don Quixote of La Mancha's garret, for it had been decided that only the women would spend the night there, Don Fernando asked the captive to tell them the story of his life, which was bound to be unusual and interesting, as he had shown by arriving in the company of Zoraida. To which the captive responded that he would gladly do as he asked, though he feared the story would not give them the pleasure he would like. Even so, in order to oblige them, he would tell it. The priest and the others thanked him, and again they asked him to begin, and he, seeing himself asked by so many, said that entreaties were not necessary when one request was more than enough. And so let your graces be attentive, and you will hear a true account that could not be equaled by fictions written with so much care and artfulness. When he said this, they all sat down and became absolutely silent, and seeing that they had stopped talking and were waiting for him to speak, In a calm and pleasant voice, he began his story, saying, and that's the end of chapter 38. All right, the backstory is in this next chapter. I think it's interesting, and maybe this is just how conversation has changed over time, but people talk a lot in this book for a very long time. Like, there are like back and forths for sure, but when Don Quixote like speaks for like 4 pages and there are no interruptions, it's just him talking, that's wild to me. That's insane. I think the only time that I'm listening to somebody talking that much without interruption is like watching a YouTube video. It's not like a real like interaction that I'm having with somebody, if that makes sense. And even if somebody is telling a story, I feel like there are very natural pauses or places for interjection or questions or like, I don't know, statements of some kind. It's wild to me. It's wild. Sorry, I just like totally messed up my hair doing that. It's fine. Okay. Chapter 39. Get in the backstory, in which the captive recounts his life and adventures. There's already a note, and it says, this is the second of the interpolated novels. There's quotes around interpolated novels. Cervantes himself had been a captive for some 5 years, and many of the elements of the story may be autobiographical, but it should also be noted, as Martin de Ricoeur points out, that it was a fairly common practice to insert a romantic tale with Moorish themes into works that otherwise seem to have little to do with either romance or the Moors. So we're having another inserted novel that sort of breaks up the action, even though this is being like told rather than read from like a novel. It's interesting. Okay. My family had its origins in the mountains of Lyon, where nature was kinder and more generous than fortune. Though in the extreme poverty of those villages, my father was known as a rich man, and he truly would have been one if he had been as skilled in preserving his wealth as he was in spending it. This propensity for being generous and open-handed came from his having been a soldier in his youth, for soldiering is a school where the stingy man becomes liberal and the liberal man becomes prodigal, and if there are any soldiers who are miserly, they are, like monsters, very rarely seen. My father exceeded the limits of generosity and bordered on being prodigal, something of little benefit to a man who is married and has children, who will succeed to his name and position. My father had 3 sons, all of an age to choose a profession. Seeing, as he said, that he could not control his own nature, he decided to deprive himself of the means and cause of his being prodigal and a spendthrift by giving up his estate. Without much, Alexander himself would have seemed a miser. And so one day he called the 3 of us into a room where we could be alone, and he said something similar to what I will say now. My sons, to say that I love you, it is enough to know and say that you are my children, and to understand that I do not love you. It is enough to know that I do not exercise control with regard to preserving your inheritance, so that you may know from now on that I love you as a father, and do not wish to destroy you as if I were your stepfather. I want to do something that I have been thinking about for a long time, and after mature consideration, have resolved to do. You are all of an age to choose a profession, or, at least, to select an occupation that will bring you honor and profit when you are older. What I have decided is to divide my fortune into 4 parts. 3 I will give to you, each one receiving exactly the same share, and the fourth I will retain to keep me for the time it pleases heaven to grant me life. But after each of you has his share of the estate, I would like you to follow the path I indicate. There is a proverb in our Spain, one that I think is very true, as they all are, for they are brief maxims taken from long, judicious experience. The one I have in mind says, "The church, the sea, or the royal house." In other words, whoever wishes to be successful and wealthy should enter the church, or go to sea as a merchant, or enter the service of kings in their courts. For as they say, better the knight's crumbs than the noble lord's favors. I say this because I would like, and it is my desire, that one of you should pursue letters, another commerce, and the third should serve the king in war, for it is very difficult to enter his service at court, and although war does not provide many riches, it tends to bring great merit and fame. In a week's time I shall give each of you his entire share in cash, down to the last ardite, as you will see. Tell me now if you wish to follow my opinion and advice in what I have proposed to you. And because I was the oldest, he ordered me to respond. And after I had told him not to divest himself of his fortune, but to spend as much of it as he wished, for we were young and could make one of our own, I concluded by saying I would do as he wished, and my desire was to follow the profession of arms, and in that way serve God and my king. The second brother made a similar statement, but he chose to go to the Indies, using his portion to buy goods. The youngest, and, I believe, the wisest, said he wanted to enter the church and complete the studies he had begun at Salamanca. When we had finished expressing our agreement and choosing our professions, my father embraced us all, and then, in as short a time as he had stated, he put into effect everything he had promised, and gave each of us his share, which, as I remember, amounted to 3,000 gold ducados. An uncle of ours bought the entire estate so that it would stay in the family, and paid for it in cash. There is a note after ducados. It says, an amount worth approximately 33,000 reales, in case you're keeping track of all of the currency. The three of us said goodbye to our good father on the same day, and on that day, thinking it was inhuman for my father to be left old and bereft of his fortune, I persuaded him to take 2,000 of my 3,000 ducados, because the remainder would be enough for me to acquire everything I needed to be a soldier. My two brothers, moved by my example, each gave him 1,000 ducados, so that my father had 4,000 in cash, and another 3,000 that was, apparently, the value of his portion of the estate, which he did not want to sell but kept as land. In short, with a good deal of emotion and many tears from everyone, we took our leave of him and the uncle I have mentioned, who asked us to inform him whenever possible about our affairs, whether prosperous or adverse. We promised we would, and they embraced us and gave us their blessing. One of us set out for Salamanca, the other left for Sevilla, and I took the road to Alicante, where I had heard that the Genoese ship was loading on wool bound for Genoa. Hey, Noodles. Good to see you. Ordance, thank you so much for the posture check and hydrate. Oh my gosh, you are forgiven. Oh, thank you. How could you tell that I needed this? Today was dumb. I'm sorry. I hope it gets better. There's still time. It is 22 years since I left my father's house, and in all that time, though I have written several letters, I have not heard anything from him or my brothers. I shall tell you briefly what happened to me in the course of this time. I embarked in Alicante, arrived safely in Genoa, Went from there to Milan, where I purchased some arms and soldiers' clothings, and from there I decided to go to Piedmont to enlist. I was already on the road to Alessandria della Paglia when I heard that the great Duke of Alba was on his way to Flanders. We have two notes. Alessandria, it says a fortified town on the Tanaro River near Milan, and after Flanders, the Duke of Alba reached Brussels on August 22nd, 1567. Oh, thanks, Noodles. Thank you so much. I changed my plans, went with him, served in his campaign, witnessed the deaths of Count Egmont and Horn, and rose to the rank of ensign under a famous captain from Guadalajara named Diego de Urbina. Some time after my arrival in Flanders, we heard news of the alliance that His Holiness Pope Pius V, of happy memory, had made with Venice and Spain to fight our common enemy, the Turks. Their fleet had recently conquered the famous island of Cyprus, which had been under the control of the Venetians. A lamentable and unfortunate loss. And we have two more notes here. After Counts Egmont and Horn, it says, Belgian noblemen who fought against the French in the Spanish army and were executed by the Duke of Alba on June 5th, 1568, for rebelling against the Inquisition. And then there is another note after Diego de Urbina. It says, Cervantes fought under this captain at the Battle of Lepanto in 1571. These footnotes are so fun. They add a lot of context and the fact that Cervantes grabbed from real life is really cool that it's inserted in here. You saw D&D again? I need to see it. If it's worth seeing twice, then I definitely need to see it at least once. It was known that the commanding general of his alliance would be His Serene Highness Don Juan of Austria, the natural brother of our good king Don Felipe II. Reports of the great preparations for war that were being made moved my spirit and excited my desire to be part of the expected campaign. And although I had hopes, almost specific promises, that at the first opportunity I would be promoted to captain, I chose to leave it all and go to Italy. And it was my good fortune that Signor Don Juan of Austria had just arrived in Genoa on his way to Naples to join the Venetian fleet, as he subsequently did in Messina. And there is a note after Messina, and it says, Cervantes, who is not an officer, apparently joined the fleet in Messina on September 2nd, 1571. It set sail on September 16th, and the Battle of Lepanto, the definitive defeat of the Turks by the Christian alliance, took place on October 7th. In short, it took part in that glorious battle, having achieved the rank of captain of infantry, in honor due more to my good luck than my merits. And that day, which was so fortunate for Christendom, because that was when the world and all the nations realized that error in thinking that the Turks were invincible at sea, on that day, I say, when Ottoman pride and arrogance were shattered among all the fortunate men who were there, for the Christians who died there were more fortunate than those left alive and victorious. I alone was fortunate, for, contrary to what I might have expected in Roman times, instead of a naval crown, I found myself on the night following so famous a day with chains on my feet and shackles on my hands. And there is a note after naval crown, and it says, the naval crown, made of gold, was awarded to the first man to board an enemy ship. This is how it happened. Ukali, king of Algiers, a daring and successful corsair, attacked and defeated the Maltese flagship, leaving only 3 knights alive, and they were badly wounded. The flagship of Juan Andrea, on which I and my company were sailing came to her assistance, and doing what needed to be done on such an occasion, I jumped onto the enemy galley that then disengaged from our ship, which had grappled her, preventing my soldiers from following me. And so I found myself alone, surrounded by my enemies, who were so numerous I could not successfully resist them. Finally, when I was covered with wounds, they took me prisoner. There are several notes. That was one long sentence. We have right after our first word, ukali, and it says Ukali or Ulik Ali, the viceroy of Algiers in 1570, did in fact take part in the actions described by Cervantes. He commanded the Ottoman fleet from 1571 to 1587 and defeated the flagship of the Order of Malta during the Battle of Lepanto. And then there is a note after Juan Andrea, and it says, Giovanni Andrea Doria of Genoese commanded the Spanish galleys. Look at all these name dropping. And, senores, as you have probably heard, Uk Ali escaped with his entire squadron, and I was his captive, the one sad man among so many who rejoiced, the one captive among so many who were free, because on that day 15,000 Christians at the oars of the Turkish fleet attained the liberty they longed for. I was taken to Constantinople, where the great Turk Selim had made my master the commanding admiral of the sea because he had done his duty in the battle, having brought back as a trophy of his valor the standard of the Order of Malta. The following year, 1572, I found myself at Navarino, rowing in the flagship that displayed the 3 lighthouses. And there is a note after lighthouses. It says an insignia that indicated the flagship of an admiral. There I saw and noted the chance that was lost to capture the entire Turkish fleet while it was all in port, because all its sailors and janissaries were certain they would be attacked in the harbor itself, and they had their clothing ready and their pasamasks, which are their shoes, so that they could escape immediately by land and not wait to do battle. That was how fearful they had become to our fleet, but heaven ordained otherwise, not through the fault or negligence of the commander of our forces, but because of the sins of Christendom, and because it is God's will that there always will be scourges to punish us. There are lots of footnotes, and I debated at the very start of this book whether or not I wanted to read the footnotes, because sometimes they just get in the way, but it is providing a lot of context, so I'm so glad that I'm continuing to read them. And so Ukali withdrew to Modon, which is an island near Navarino, and putting his people ashore, he fortified the entrance to the port, and remained there until Señor Don Juan left. On this voyage, the galley La Presa, whose captain was a son of the famous corsair called I thought it said Barbosa. It does not say Barbosa. I was like, Captain Barbosa, excuse me. Called Barbarossa, very close, was captured by the flagship of Naples, La Loba, under the command of that lightning bolt of war, that father to his soldiers, that victorious and never defeated Don Alvaro de Bazan, the Marquis of Santa Cruz. I want to be sure to tell you what happened in the capture of La Presa. The son of Barbarossa was so cruel and treated his captives so badly that as soon as those on the oars saw La Loba approaching and overtaking them, they all dropped their oars at the same time and seized the captain, who stood at his post and shouted at them to row faster. And they threw him from bench to bench, from stern to bow, biting him so many times that by the time he passed the mast his soul had passed on to hell. So cruel was his treatment of them, as I have said, and so great their hatred of him. Thank you, Star. Thank you for letting it pass. It seems fitting, right, that it is Captain Barbossa. We returned to Constantinople, and the following year, 1573, we heard how Señor Don Juan had conquered Tunis, capturing the kingdom from the Turks and turning it over to Muley Hamet, thereby destroying the hopes of Muley Hamida, the cruelest and most valiant Moor in the world, that he would return to the throne. And there is a note, and it says, Muley Hamet, or Muley Muhammad, took possession of Tunis in October of 1573. The following year, he was captured by the Turks. His brother, Muley Hamida, or Ahmad Sultan, attempted to join the attack on Tunis in 1573 by Don Juan of Austria and died in Palermo of 1575. You gotta watch those frozen pizzas. Those Palermos will get you. That was a terrible joke. The great Turk felt this loss very deeply, and making use of the sagacity that all those of his house possesses, he made peace with the Venetians, who desired it much more than he did, and the following year, which was 1574, he attacked the Goletta, and the fort that Señor Don Juan had left partially constructed near Tunis. And there's a note after Goletta, and it says the fortress that protected Tunis. During all these battles, I was at the oar, without any hope of freedom. At least, I did not hope to obtain it by means of a ransom, because I had decided not to write the news of my misfortune to my father. In the end, the Goletta was lost, and the fort as well, attacked by 75,000 regular Turkish soldiers and more than 400,000 Moors and Arabs from the rest of Africa. And this vast army had so many weapons and supplies and so many sappers that they could have picked up earth and covered over the Goletta and the fort using only their bare hands. The Goletta, until that time considered impregnable, was the first to fall, not because of any fault in its defenders, who did in its defense everything they should have done and all that they could do, but because experience showed how easily earthworks could be built in that desert sand, for at one time water was found at a depth of 2 spans, but the Turks did not find it at a depth of 2 varas, and so with countless sacks of sand they built earthworks so high that they rose above the walls of the fort, and their soldiers could fire down on the fort, and no one could stay there or help in its defense. There's a note after varas, and it says, a span, palmo, is approximately 8 inches, a vara, about 2.8 feet. It was the general opinion that our forces should not have closed themselves inside the Goletta, but waited for the landing in open country, and those who say this speak from the entrance and with little experience of this kind of warfare, because inside the Goletta and the fort there were barely 7,000 soldiers, and how could so small a number, no matter how brave, have gone into open country and defended the forts at the same time against the far larger numbers of the enemy? And how is it possible not to lose a fort when there is no relief, and it is surrounded by so many resolute enemies fighting on their own land? But it seemed to many, and it seemed to me, that it was a special grace and mercy that heaven conferred on Spain when it allowed the destruction of that breeding ground and shelter for wickedness, that voracious, gluttonous devourer of infinite amounts of money spent there to no avail, yet serving no other purpose than to preserve the happy memory of its having been captured by the invincible Carlos V, as if those stones were necessary to make his fame eternal, as it is now and forever will be. The fort was lost, too, but the Turks had to take it a span at a time, because the soldiers who defended it fought so valiantly and fiercely that they killed more than 25,000 of the enemy in 22 general assaults. 300 of our soldiers survived, every one of them wounded when he was taken prisoner, a sure and certain sign of their tenacity and valor, and of how well they defended and protected their positions. A small fortress or tower in the middle of the lagoon, commanded by Don Juan Zanaguera, a famous gentleman and soldier from Valencia, surrendered on advantageous terms. They captured Don Pedro Puertocarrero, the general in command of the Goleta, who did everything possible to defend the fortress and felt its loss so deeply that he died of sorrow on the road to Constantinople, where he was being taken as a prisoner. They also captured the general in command of the fort, whose name was Gabriel Servillon, a Milanese gentleman who was a great engineer and a very courageous soldier. Many notable men died in those two forts. One was Pagan Doria, a knight of the Order of St. John, an extremely generous man who showed great liberality to his brother, the famous Juan de Andrea Doria. That made his death even sadder. What made his death even sadder was that he died at the hands of some Arabs who he trusted when he saw that the fort was lost. They offered to take him, dressed him as a Moor, to Tabarca, a small port where the Genoese, who engaged in the coral trade along these shores, keep a house. These Arabs cut off his head and took it to the commander of the Turkish fleet, who confirmed for them our Spanish proverb, "For the treason we are grateful, though we find the traitor hateful." And so, they say, the commander ordered the two who brought him the present to be hanged because they did not bring the man to him alive. Among the Christians captured in the fort, there was one named Don Pedro de Aguilar, a native of Andalusia, though I do not know the town, who hath been an ensign, and a soldier of great note and rare intelligence. He had a special gift for what they call poetry. I say this because his luck brought him to my galley and my bench, to be the slave of my master. And before we left that port, this gentleman composed 2 sonnets as epitaphs, one of the Goleta, and the other for the fort. The truth is, I must recite them, because I know them by heart, and I believe they will give you more pleasure than grief. When the captive named Don Pedro de Aguilar, Don Fernando looked at his companions, and all 3 of them smiled. And when the captain mentioned the sonnets, one of them said, before your grace continues, I beg you to tell me what happened to this Don Pedro de Aguilar." "What I do know," responded the captive, "is that after spending 2 years in Constantinople he escaped, disguised as an Albanian, and in the company of a Greek spy, and I do not know if he obtained his freedom, though I believe he did, because a year later I saw the Greek in Constantinople, but could not ask if they had been successful." "Well, they were," responded the gentleman, "for Don Pedro is my brother, and he is now in our home, safe, rich, and married, with 3 children." "Thanks be to God," said the captive, "for the mercies he has received. In my opinion, there is no joy on earth equal to that of regaining the freedom one has lost." "What is more," replied the gentleman, "I know the sonnets my brother wrote." "Then your grace should recite them," said the captive, "for I am certain you can say them better than I." "I would be happy to," responded the gentleman. The one to the Goleta says. And that's the end of chapter 39. It's so interesting how all of these people who don't necessarily know each other are so entangled in each other's lives. It's like, however many degrees to Kevin Bacon, like everybody knows somebody that knows somebody, which proves or shows like how wide the world is, but also how very small it is. And I like that. I like how that's included in this. Is cool. Chapter 40. Yeah, chapter 40. In which the history of the captive continues. Sonnet. O blissful souls, who from the mortal veil, freed and unconfined, flew from this low earth, borne on the wings of brave and virtuous deeds, to the highest, holiest spheres of glorious heaven, ablaze with fury and with righteous zeal, and summoning all your honor and your strength, you colored the ocean and the sandy ground with your own blood, and with the enemies. You lost your lives before you lost the valor of your weary, battling arms in death. Though you are vanquished, victory is yours. Your mortal, melancholy fall between the ramparts and the attacking horde brings you fame in this world, blessed glory in the next. It's so interesting reading poetry, specifically poetry that's been translated. Yes, this whole book has been translated, but specifically poetry because with poetry, and not saying that this rhymes at all in any way, but finding the same meaning, the same tone, the same translation, and also maybe it rhymes is just crazy to me. It's just so crazy to be able to do that at such a high level of translation. It's wild. That is how I remember it too, said the captive. And the one to the fort, if I remember correctly, said the gentleman, reads like this. Sonnet. Up from this sterile, devastated ground, these scattered clods of earth, these ruined stones, the saintly souls of 3,000 warriors rose, immortal, to their glorious home. After wielding in vain the emboldened might of their courageous arms until, at last, the exhausted few, too few to resist, gave up their lives to the enemy's sharp blade. This is ground that has been the constant home of 1,000 sad, heroic memories, in times long gone and in the present day. From its hard bosom no more righteous souls have risen to the shining gates of heaven, nor has it held the bodies of braver men. They liked the sonnets. The captive was glad to hear the news about his comrade, and continuing his story, he said, having conquered the Goletta and the fort, the Turks ordered the Goletta to be dismantled, because it had been so damaged there was nothing left to raise, and in order to do this more quickly and easily, they mined it in 3 places. They could not blow up what had seemed its weakest part, that is, the old walls, but what was left standing of the new fortifications built by El Fratin came down easily. There is a note after El Fratin, and it says, nicknamed El Fratin, the little friar, Jacome Pagliazzo fortified a number of garrisons for the Spanish monarchy. Then the fleet returned to Constantinople, triumphant and victorious, and a few months after that my master, Ukali, died. He was called Ukali Fartax. In the Turkish language, it means the renegade, with scabies, which is, in fact, what he was. For it is customary among the Turks to name people for some fault or virtue they have, and this is because they have only 4 family names, and these come from the Ottoman house. The rest, as I have said, take their first and second names from physical defects or character traits. And we have 2 notes. One after Ukali died, and it said the historical Ukali died suddenly on June 21st, 1587 in Constantinople. And then the second note is after the Ottoman house, and it says the 4 Ottoman family names are Muhammad, Mustafa, Murad, and Ali. And this man with scabies rode in the galleys as a slave of the great lord for 14 years, and when he was past the age of 34 he became a renegade because of his fury at a Turk who slapped him while he was rowing. In order to take his revenge, he abandoned his faith. His valor was so great that, without using the vile and devious means that most of the great Turks' favorites employ in order to succeed, he became king of Algiers and then admiral of the sea, which is the 3rd position in that empire. He came from Calabria, and morally he was a good man who treated his captives very humanely. He had 3,000 of them, and after his death they were divided, according to the terms of his will, between the great Turk, who is the heir of everyone who dies and shares in the inheritance with the dead man's children, and his renegades. I was passed along to a Venetian renegade who had been a cabin boy when he was captured by Ukali, who was very fond of the boy and pampered him a good deal. Yet he became the cruelest renegade anyone has ever seen. His name was Azan Aga, and he became very rich, and he also became king of Algiers. I came there with him from Constantinople, rather happy to be so close to Spain, not because I intended to write to anyone about my misfortunes, but to see if my luck would be better in Algiers than it had been in Constantinople, where I had tried 1,000 different ways to escape, and none had been successful. In Algiers, I intended to look for other means to achieve what I desired, for the hope of obtaining my freedom never left me, and when I had devised, planned, and attempted, did not correspond to my intentions, I did not give up, but sought out some other hope to sustain me, no matter how weak and fragile. And there is a note after. He also became king of Algiers, and it says, Hassan Baha, king of Algiers between 1577 and 1578, was born in Venice in 1545. He was captured by the Turks, renounced Christianity, and led the Turks landing at Cadaqués and Alicante. Cervantes met him during his own captivity. Little sneak peek, little hot tip. I guess it wasn't a tip. Okay. This was how I spent my life, locked in a prison or house that the Turks called a bagnio, where they hold Christian captives, those that belong to the king as well as some that belong to private individuals, and the ones they called stockpiled, which is like saying public prisoners, who serve the city in public works and in other employment for the general good. These captives find it very difficult to obtain their freedom, because they have no individual master, and there is no one with whom to negotiate their ransom, even if a ransom is available. As I have said, some private individuals bring their captives to these bagnios, principally when they are ready to be ransomed, because there they can be kept, not working and in safety, until the ransom money arrives. The king's captives who are about to be ransomed do not go out with the work crews either, unless payment of their ransom is delayed, and then, to make them write more urgently for the money, they are obliged to work and are sent out with the others for food, which is no easy labor. I was one of those waiting for ransom, for when they learned that I was a captain, though I told them of my limited possibilities and lack of wealth, they put me with the gentlemen and the people waiting ransom. They put a chain on me, more as a sign that I was to be ransomed than to hold me, and I spent my days in that bagnio, with many other gentlemen and people of note who had been selected to be held for ransom. Although hunger and scant clothing troubled us at times, even most of the time, nothing troubled us as much as constantly hearing and seeing my master's remarkably and exceptionally cruel treatment of Christians. Each day he hanged someone, impaled someone, cut off someone's ears, and with so little provocation, or without any provocation at all, that the Turks knew he did it merely for the sake of doing it, and because it was in his nature to murder the entire human race. The only one who held his own with him was a Spanish soldier, named something de Saavedra, who did things that he will be remembered by those people for many years, and all to gain his liberty. Yet his master never beat him, or ordered anyone else to beat him, or said an unkind word to him. For the most minor of all the things he did, we were afraid he would be impaled, and more than once he feared the same thing. If I had time, I would tell you something of what the soldier did, which would entertain and amaze you much more than this recounting of my history. And there is a note, and looking ahead of the note, I knew it. After Saavedra, it says, the allusion is to Cervantes himself. His complete surname was Cervantes Saavedra. He inserted himself into his own book. That's so great. That's so great. And you get to see like what he was like as a soldier. Definite troublemaker. Great. Amazing. Troublemaker. You know what I mean. In any case, overlooking the courtyard of our prison were the windows of the house of a wealthy and important Moor, and these, as is true in most Moorish houses, were more slits than windows. Yet even these were covered with very heavy and tightly woven jalousies. One day I happened to be on a flat roof in our prison with 3 companions. We were passing the time by trying to see how far we could jump with our chains on, for we were alone, all the other Christians having gone out to work. By chance, I looked up and saw that through one of those narrow little windows I've mentioned a reed appeared, with a handkerchief tied to the end of it, and the reed was moving about, almost as if it were signaling that we should come and take it. We thought about it, and one of the men who was with me went to stand under the reed to see if it would drop, or what would happen. But as soon as he reached the spot, the reed was raised and moved from side to side as if shaking its head. No. The Christian came back, and again the reed was raised and lowered with the same movements as before. Another of my companions approached, and again the same thing happened. Then the third man approached. The same thing was repeated, and seeing this, I wanted to try my luck too. And as soon as I placed myself under the reed, it was dropped inside the bagnio and fell at my feet. I immediately untied the handkerchief, which had a knot in it, and inside were 10 cianis, which were coins of base gold used by the Moors, each one worth 10 of our reales. It goes without saying that I was delighted with this discovery, and my happiness was as great as my amazement at the thought of where that gift had come from, and why it was directed to me, since the signs of not wanting to drop the reed for anyone but me clearly indicated that I was the object of the fervor of the favor. I took the money, broke the reed, returned to the roof, looked at the window, and saw an extremely white hand emerge and open and close the window very quickly. With this we understood or imagined that a woman who lived in that house must have done us this kindness, and as a sign that we thanked her for it, we made our salams in the Moorish manner, bending our head, bowing from the waist, and crossing our arms on our chests. A short while later, a small cross made of reeds was dangled from the window and immediately pulled back in. This confirmed that a Christian woman was probably a captive in that house, and was the one who had done us the good turn. But the whiteness of her hand and the bracelets we saw on it disabused us of the thought that she was a slave. Then we imagined she must be a renegade Christian, for they are often taken as legitimate wives by their masters, who consider this good fortune, since the men esteem them more than the women of their own nation. In all our speculations, however, we were very far from the truth of the matter, although from then on we spent our time looking at the window where our north star of a reed had appeared. But 2 weeks went by, and we did not see it again, or the hand, or any other signal of any kind. During this time, although we made every effort to learn who lived in that house, and if there was a renegade Christian woman there, no one would tell us anything except that it belonged to a very prominent and wealthy Moor named Agi Morado, who had been the governor of La Plata, which is a very distinguished position among those people. We have 2 notes in that sentence. After Agi Morado, it says a historical figure. Agi Morado, or Haji Murad, the son of Slavic parents, renounced Christianity and became an important personage in Algiers. And then the other note is after Lapata, and it says Lapata is Al-Batha, a fortress city. But when we least expected another shower of sianis, we suddenly saw the reed appear, another handkerchief attached to it that had an even larger knot. This occurred when the Bagnio, as on the previous occasion, was deserted and empty of people. We made the same test. Each of the 3 men, the same ones who had been with me the last time, went forward before I did. But the reed was not given up to anyone but me, because as soon as I stepped forward, it dropped. I untied the knot and found 40 Spanish gold escudos and a paper written in Arabic, at the bottom of which a large cross had been drawn. I kissed the cross, took the escudos, and returned to the roof, where we all made our salams. The hand appeared again. I signaled that I would read the letter, and the window closed. We were all astounded and overjoyed at what had happened, but since none of us understood Arabic, our desire to know what the paper said was immense, and the difficulty in finding someone to read it to us was even greater. Finally, I decided to trust a renegade, a native of Murcia, who claimed to be a great friend of mine, and made pledges to me, obliging him to keep any secrets I confided in him, because certain renegades, when they intend to return to Christian lands, take with them signed statements from important captives testifying, in whatever fashion they can, that the renegade is a moral man, and always has treated Christians well, and desires to escape at the first opportunity. Some obtain these declarations with good intentions. Others use them as a possible defense when they come to plunder Christian lands. If they happen to be shipwrecked or are taken prisoner, they show their declarations and say these papers prove their intention to remain in Christian lands, which was the reason they came on a raid with the Turks. In this way, they avoid the initial violence of their captors and reconcile with the Church, and no one does them any harm, and at the first opportunity, they return to Barbary to be what they were before. There are others, however, who obtain and use these papers with good intentions and remain in Christian lands. Well, my friend was one of these renegades, and he had statements from all our comrades attesting in every way possible to his good faith, and if the Moors had found him with these papers, they would have burned him alive. I had learned that he knew Arabic very well, and could not only speak it, but write it too. But before I told him everything, I asked him to read the paper for me, saying I had found it in a crack in the wall of my cell. He unfolded it, and spent a good time looking at it, analyzing it, and murmuring to himself. I asked him if he understood it. He said he understood it very well, and if I wanted him to repeat it word for word, I should give him ink and a pen, which would allow him to do a better job. We soon gave him what he requested. He translated the letter slowly, and when he was finished, he said, "Everything written here, in Spanish, is exactly what this Moorish letter contains. You should know that where it says Lela Marianne, it means Our Lady, the Virgin Mary." We read the paper, and this is what it said. When I was a little girl, my father had a slave woman who taught me, in my own language, a Christian zala, or prayer, and she told me many things about Layla Marianne. The Christian slave died, and I know she did not go to the fire, but to Allah, because afterward I saw her 2 times, and she told me to go to a Christian land to see Layla Marianne, who loved me very much. I do not know how to go. I have seen many Christians through this window, and none has seemed as much a gentleman as you. I am very beautiful and young, and I have a good deal of money to take with me. See if you can plan how we can go, and when we are there, you can be my husband if you like, and if you do not, it will not matter, because Layla Marianne will give me someone to marry. I wrote this. Be careful who you ask to read it. Do not trust any more, because they are all false. I'm very worried about that. I wish you would not show it to anybody, because if my father finds out, he will throw me in a well and cover me over with stones. I will put a thread on the reed. Tie your answer there, and if you do not have anybody who writes Arabic, give me your answer in signs. Layla Marianne will make me understand. May she and Allah protect you, and this cross that I kiss many times, as the captive woman taught me to do. Consider, senores, if there was reason for the word of this letter to astound and delight us. Our feelings were so intense that the renegade realized the paper had not been found by chance, but really been written to one of us, and he implored us that if what he suspected was true, that we trust him and tell him so, and he would risk his life for our freedom. And saying this, he pulled out from under his shirt a metal crucifix, and with many tears, he swore by the God that the image represented, and in whom he, though a sinner, believed completely and faithfully, that he would be loyal to us and keep secret anything we wished to tell him. He thought, and could almost predict, that by means of the woman who had written the letter, he and all of us would obtain our freedom, and he would find himself where he longed to be, which was reunited with the body of Holy Mother Church, from whom, like a rotten limb, he had separated and severed because of his ignorance and sin. The renegade said this with so many tears and displays of so much repentance that we were all of the same opinion and agreed to tell him the truth, and so we revealed everything to him, hiding nothing. We showed him the narrow window where the reed had appeared, and he took careful note of the house and agreed to take special and particular care to learn who lived in it. We also agreed that it would be a good idea to rely on the Moorish lady's letter, since we now had someone who could do that. The renegade immediately set about writing down the words I had told him, which were precisely the ones I shall tell you now, because none of the substantive points of this matter had disappeared from my memory, and none will for as long as I live. This, then, was the response to the Moorish lady. May the true Allah keep you, Senora, and the blessed Marianne, the true Mother of God, who has given you the desire to go to Christian lands because she loves you dearly. Pray to her, and ask how you can accomplish what she commands of you to do. She is so good that she will certainly respond to your prayer. On behalf of myself and all these Christians who are with me, I offer to do for you everything that we can until the day of our death. Continue to write to me and tell me what you intend to do, and I shall always reply, for Almighty Allah has given us a Christian captive who can speak and write your language, as you will see by this letter. Therefore, without fear of any kind, you can tell us anything you wish. As for what you have said regarding becoming my wife if you reach Christian lands, I give you my word as a good Christian that you will, and you should know that Christians keep their promises better than Moors. May Allah and his mother Marianne bless and keep you, Senora. This letter was written and sealed. I waited 2 days until I was again alone in the bagnio, and then I went to the usual place on the flat roof to see if the reed would appear, and it did in a very short time. As soon as I saw it, though I could not see who was holding it, I displayed my letter as a way of asking that she attach the thread. But she already had, and I tied the letter to it, and a short while later our star appeared again, with the knotted handkerchief, our white flag of peace. She let it drop, and I picked it up, and found in the handkerchief, in a variety of silver and gold coins, more than 50 escudos, which increased our joy 50 times over and confirmed our hope of obtaining our freedom. That same night our renegade returned, and told us he had learned that a Moor, about whom he had already heard, named Agi Morato, lived in the house. He was extremely rich, and had one child, a daughter, who would inherit his entire estate. It was the general opinion in the city that she was the most beautiful woman in Barbary, and many viceroys had come to ask for her hand, but she never had wanted to marry. He had also learned that she once had a Christian slave woman who had died, all of which agreed with what she had written in her letter. Then we began to consult with the renegade regarding how we could rescue her and escape to Christian lands. Finally, we decided to wait for a second letter from Zoraida, for this was the name of the lady who now wishes to be called Maria, because she saw very clearly that she alone would be the means about all our difficulties. And there is a subscript, or a note, a little note after Maria, after, like, wishes to be called Maria, and it says, according to Martine de Ricoeur, the daughter of Agi Morato was in fact named Zahara. In 1574, she married Abd al-Malik, who was proclaimed Sultan of Morocco in 1576, and died in the Battle of Alcanzakivir against the Portuguese in 1578. She was remarried to Hassan Baha and after 1580 lived in Constantinople. In other words, some characters in the story of the captive are historical, although the action is fictional. After we agreed to this, the renegade told us not to worry, for he would bring us to freedom or die in the attempt. For 4 days the bagnio was filled with people, which meant that for 4 days the reed did not appear. Then, when the bagnio was deserted once more, it appeared as usual, bearing a handkerchief so pregnant that it promised a most fortunate birth. The reed came down to me, and in the handkerchief I found another letter and 100 gold escudos, and no other kind of coin. The renegade was there. In our cell, we gave him the letter to read, and he said this is what it said. I do not know, Senor, how we shall go to Spain. Leila Marianne has not told me, though I have asked her, but what we can do is this. I shall give you many gold coins through the window. Use them to ransom yourself and your friends, and one of you go to a Christian land and buy a boat and come back for the others. You will find me on my father's country estate, which is near the Babazon Gate, close to the ocean, where I must spend the summer with my father and my servants. At night you could safely take me from there to a boat. Remember that you must marry me, because if you do not, I shall ask Marianne to punish you. If you do not trust anyone else to go for the boat, pay your own ransom and go yourself. I know you are more likely to return than any of the others, for you are a gentleman and a Christian. Try to learn where the estate is, and when you come out of the roof I shall know the bagnio is empty, and give you a good deal of money. Allah keep you, Senor. What a weird way to get married. You don't even really know each other. It's wild to me. This is what the second letter stated and declared. When everyone had heard it, each man offered to be the one who was ransomed, promising to go and return quickly. And I also made the same offer. This was opposed by the renegade, who said that under no circumstances would he consent to one man escaping to freedom until all of us could escape together. for experience had taught him how badly free men kept the promises made in captivity. Important prisoners had often used this same plan, ransoming one man so that he could go to Valencia or Mallorca with enough money to equip a boat and return for those who had ransomed him. But those men never returned, because, as he said, the freedom they obtained and the fear of losing it again erased from their memories every obligation they had in the world. As confirmation of the truth he was telling us, he recounted briefly an incident that had occurred very recently to some Christian gentlemen, the strangest that had ever happened in that place where astounding and remarkable things happen every day. Eventually, he said that what he could and should do was to give the ransom money to him so that he could buy a boat there in Algiers, pretending he had planned to become a merchant and trader in Tetuan and along the coast. When he was a master of the ship, it would be easy to devise a way to get all of us out of the Bagnio and on board, especially if the Moorish lady did as she said and gave us enough money to ransom everyone. For when we were free, it would be extremely easy for us to go aboard, even in the middle of the day. The greatest difficulty was that the Moors do not permit any renegade to buy or own a boat, unless it is a large vessel used for making pirate raids, because they fear that if he buys a boat, especially if he is a Spaniard, he wants it only to go to Christian lands. He would avoid this problem by taking on a Tagarino to be his partner in the purchase of the boat and to share the profits, and by means of this deception he would become master of the ship, and then all the rest would be simple. And there is a note after Tagarino, and it says, "This is the name for perfectly bilingual Moors, usually converts to Christianity, who had lived among Christians. They often came from the ancient kingdom of Aragon, which included present-day Aragon, Catalunya, Valencia, and Balearic Islands." Although my comrades and I thought it would be better to buy the boat in Mallorca, as the Moorish lady had said, we did not dare contradict him, fearing that if we did not do as he wished, he would betray us and endanger our lives by revealing our dealings with the Zoraida. And to protect her life, we would certainly have given our own. And so we resolved to put ourselves in the hands of God and the renegade, and we replied to Zoraida, telling her we would do everything she advised because her advice was as good as if Leila Merien had told her what to do, and it was entirely up to her whether the plan should be delayed or put into effect immediately. Again I offered to be her husband, and then on the following day the Bagnio happened to be deserted, and using the reed and the handkerchief several times, she gave me 2,000 gold escudos and a letter in which she said the next Juma, which is Friday, she was going to her father's country estate, and before she left, she would give us more money, and if it was not enough, we should tell her, and she would give us as much as we asked for, because her father had so much money he would not miss it, especially since she had the keys to everything. We gave 500 escudos to the renegade so that he could buy the boat. With 800 more I was ransomed, having given the money to a merchant from Valencia who was in Algiers at the time, and who ransomed me from the king by promising to pay the money after the next ship arrived from Valencia. If he paid right away, the king would suspect that my ransom had been in Algiers for some time, and the merchant had concealed it for his own profit. Then, too, my master was so suspicious that I did not dare to pay out the money all at once. On the Thursday before the Friday, when the beautiful Zoraida was to leave for the estate, she gave us another 1,000 escudos, and informed us that she was leaving, and asked that if I were to be ransomed, I should learn where my father's country estate was, and at all costs find a reason for going there and seeing her. I responded with few words, saying that I would, and that she would be sure to commend all of us to Lela Merien with the prayers the slave woman had taught her. After this, my 3 companions were ransomed to facilitate our leaving the Bagnio, because if they saw me ransomed when they were not, and there was enough money, they might become alarmed, and the devil could persuade them to do some harm to Zoraida, even though their being the men they were could have allied this fear. Still, I did not want to endanger the plan in any way, so I had them ransomed in the same manner I had ransomed myself, giving all the money to the merchant, so that he could offer a guarantee for us with confidence and security, but never disclosing our plans and our secret to him because of the danger that would have entailed. End of chapter 40. I am enjoying the story. Yes, I know that it is a break in the action of what is happening. However, I am really liking it. So that's cool. Yeah, and I'm sure just like all of the other stories, it's going to circle around, which it sort of already did. Like one of the characters or one of the people that was in the story is related to Cardenio, which is kind of cool. Like it's his brother. Was it Cardenio or was it Don Fernando? It was one of them. I don't remember. But that's cool. So yeah, I understand the criticism. I've said this a million times. I'm gonna say it again. I understand the criticisms that people have of it cutting off the action, but I'm still enjoying these stories, and I know from, the 350 pages before this that it will come around. I don't know about that first one. I don't know. But seeing as this is a story that's being told by someone, I'm guessing that it's going to go full circle rather than like the novel one. Sort of like how like Cardenio's story just like went full circle. That's what I'm thinking anyway, but what do I know? It's a long story too. It's super interesting that, and I know that it's very different because, it's like a novel. It's not actually like people having these conversations, but people like just meet somebody and then they just devolve their whole life story, and that's so interesting to me because that is not what I would do. All right, chapter 41, in which the captive continues his tale. Before 2 weeks had passed, our renegade bought a very good boat with room for more than 30 people, and to guarantee the success of his plan and lend it credibility, he wanted to sail to a town called Sargel, to some 30 leagues from Algiers in the direction of Oran, where there is a brisk trade in dried figs. He made the trip 2 or 3 times, accompanied by the Tagarino he had mentioned. In Barbary, they called the Moors from Aragon Tagarinos, and the ones from Granada Mudejares. In the kingdom of Fez, Mudejares are called Elches, and these are the people used most by the king in war. In any event, each time the renegade passed by in his boat, he anchored in a cove not 2 crossbow shots from the country estate where Zoraida was waiting. There the renegade was purposefully joined There the renegade very purposefully joined the Moors who were at the oars, either to say a zala or to rehearse what he actually intended to do, and so he would go to Zoraida's house and ask for fruit, and her father gave it to him, and did not recognize him, although he wanted to speak to Zoraida, as he later told me, and tell her that she should be happy and free of doubt, because he was the man who would take her, on my orders, to a Christian land. It was not possible, because Moorish women do not allow any Moor or Turk to see them unless instructed to do so by their husbands or fathers. They allow Christian captives to spend time with them and talk with them, even more than is reasonable. Yet it would have made me unhappy if he had spoken to her, because she might have been alarmed to see that her affairs were being discussed by renegades. God willed otherwise, however, and our renegade did not have the opportunity to carry out his virtuous desire, but he saw that he could go back and forth to Sargel in safety and anchor whenever and however and wherever he chose, and that the Tagarino, his partner, followed his instructions to the letter. I had been ransomed, and all he needed to do was find Christians to man the oars, and so he told me to decide which of the prisoners, because those who had been ransomed I wanted to take with me, and to arrange for them to be ready on the following Friday, which he had determined should be the day of our departure. Consequently, I spoke to 12 Spaniards, all of them valiant oarsmen, who could leave the city without difficulty. It was no easy task finding so many at that time, because 20 ships were out making raids, and had taken all the oarsmen with them, and I would not have found these if their master had not decided to make no raids that summer in order to finish building a galley that he had in his shipyard. I told them only that on the following Friday in the afternoon they were to sneak out one by one, go to the far side of Aggie Morado's country estate, and wait for me there. I gave each of them these instructions separately, and said that even if they saw other Christians, they were to say nothing except that I had instructed them to wait in that spot. Having finished this, I still had another task to attend to, which was most important to me. I had to inform Zoraida of the progress we had made. So that she would remain observant and alert, and not be taken by surprise if we attacked before she thought it possible for the Christian boat to have returned. And so I resolved to go to the estate to see if I could talk to her, and on the pretext of gathering greens, one day before my departure I went there, and the first person I met was her father, who spoke to me in the language used between captives and Moors throughout Barbary, and even in Constantinople. It is not Moorish or Castilian, not the language of any nation, but a mixture of all tongues, and with it we can understand one another. It was in this language that he asked me what I wanted in his garden, and whose slave I was. I replied that I belonged to Arnaute Mami. I said this because I knew very well that the man was his great friend, and that I was looking for greens to prepare a salad. And there is a note after Mami. It says, "This is the name of the pirate who captured Cervantes." I love these little tidbits. It just makes the story more exciting and a little bit cooler. Then he asked me if I was for ransom and how much my master was asking for. As we were exchanging these questions and answers, the beautiful Zoraida, who had not seen me for some time, came out of the house, and since Moorish women, as I have said, are in no way reluctant or shy about showing themselves to Christians, she did not hesitate to approach the spot where her father was talking to me. In fact, as soon as her father saw that she was walking towards us, rather slowly he called to her and asked her to approach. I cannot begin to describe for you the great beauty and grace, or the elegance of the rich attire revealed to me by my beloved Zoraida. I will say only that more pearls hung from her lovely neck, ears and tresses than she had hairs on her head. Around her ankles, which were bare, in accordance with Moorish custom, she wore 2 carcajes, the Moorish name for bracelets, and bangles for the feet, of purest gold, studded with so many diamonds that, as she told me later, her father had valued them at 10,000 doblas, and the ones on her wrists were worth the same amount. And there is a note after doblas, and it says, a gold coin worth approximately 6 silver reales. She wore a large quantity of very fine pearls, because the greatest pride and joy of Moorish women is to adorn themselves with rich pearls, both large and small, and so the Moors have more pearls than any other nation. Zoraida's father was said to own many of the best pearls in Algiers, and to have more than 200,000 Spanish escudos, and she who is now mistress of my heart was mistress of all this. If she looks beautiful now, after her many tribulations, imagine how lovely she was then, dressed in all her finery. Because it is well known that the beauty of some women has its days and its seasons, and decreases or increases according to what happens to them, and it is natural for their soul's passions to heighten or diminish that beauty, although they must commonly destroy it. But at that moment she appeared so richly attired, and so exceedingly beautiful, that she seemed the loveliest woman I had ever seen. Furthermore, considering all that I owed her, it seemed to me that I had before me a heavenly goddess come down to earth to be my joy and salvation. As soon as she approached us, her father told her in their language that I was a slave of his friend, Mami, and had come to pick a salad. Just coming to pick a salad, no big deal. Oh no, I've lost my place. She began to speak, and in that mixture of languages I have already mentioned, she asked me if I was a gentleman and why I had not been ransomed. I replied that I had not been ransomed, and for a price that would indicate how much my master valued me, for I had paid 1,500 zoltanis for myself, to which she responded, in truth, if you belonged to my father, I would make certain that he did not ransom you for twice that amount, because you Christians always lie and pretend to be poor in order to deceive the Moors. There is a note after zoltanis. It says a coin worth approximately 17 reales. That may be so, señora, I replied, but the truth is that I have been honest with my master, as I am and will be with everyone in the world. And when do you leave? Said Zoraida. Tomorrow, I believe, I said, because a ship from France is scheduled to sail tomorrow, and I intend to leave on it. Do you think it would be better, Zoraida replied, to wait for a vessel from Spain and sail on that rather than a ship from France, for the French are not your friends? No, I responded, though if it is true, as I have heard, that a ship is arriving from Spain, I might wait for it. But it is more likely that I shall leave tomorrow, because the desire I have to be in my own country and with the people I love is so great that I cannot endure waiting for another opportunity, even if it is a better one. No doubt you are married in your own country, said Zoraida, and wish to return to your wife. I am not married, I responded, but I have given my word to marry as soon as I return there. And is the lady to whom you gave your word beautiful? Said Zoraida. She is beautiful, I responded, that truthfully. She looks a great deal like you. At this her father laughed heartily and said, By Allah, Christian, she must be very beautiful if she resembles my daughter, who is the most beautiful woman in this kingdom. If you doubt it, look at her carefully, and you will see that I am telling you the truth. Zoraida's father, who was a Ladino, acted as our interpreter for most of this exchange, for although she spoke the debased language that, as I have said, is used there, she tended to declare her meanings more by gesture than by words. And there is a note after Ladino, and it says, in this context, the word means a Moor who knew a Romance language. As we were conversing, a Moor came running, shouting that 4 Turks had come over the fence, or a wall of the estate, and were picking the fruit, even though it was not ripe. The old man was alarmed, as was Zoraida, because the fear the Moors have of the Turks, especially the soldiers, is widespread and almost instinctive, for they are so insolent and overbearing in their dealings with the Moors, who are their subjects, that they treat them worse than slaves. And so her father said to Zoraida, "Daughter, go to the house and lock yourself in, while I speak to these dogs, and you, Christian, look for your salad and leave, and may Allah bring you safely to your home." I bowed, and he went to find the Turks, leaving me alone with Zoraida, who began to give indications of following her father's instructions. But as soon as he was hidden by the trees of the garden, she turned to me, her eyes full of tears, and said, "Amixi, Christian, amixi," which means, "Are you leaving, Christian? Are you leaving?" I replied, "Yes, Señora, but not under any circumstances without you. Wait for me on Huma, and do not be alarmed when you see us, for there is no doubt that we will go to Christian lands." I said this in such a way that she understood very well all the words that had passed between us, and putting her arm around my neck, she began to walk toward the house, with faltering steps, as luck would have it, for things could have gone very badly if heaven had not willed otherwise, as we were walking in this fashion, she with her arm around my neck. Her father, who had returned from chasing away the Turks, saw us, and we saw that he had seen us. Zoraida, who was intelligent and clever, did not remove her arm, but clung even closer and placed her hand on my chest, letting her knees go limp and giving clear signs and indications that she was in a swoon, while I, for my part, acted as if I were holding her up against my will. Her father came running over to us, saw his daughter in that condition, and asked her what was wrong. When she did not answer, her father said, "No doubt her alarm at those dogs coming in here has made her faint." And taking her from me, he leaned her head against his chest. She heaved a sigh, and with her eyes still wet with tears repeated, "Amexi, Christian, amexi." "Leave, Christian, leave." To which her father replied, "Does not matter, daughter, if the Christian leaves. He has done you no harm, and the Turks have gone. Do not be afraid. Nothing can harm you. I said the Turks to go, and they left the way they came in." "Señor, they frightened her, as you have said," I told her father. "But since she says I should leave, I do not wish to cause her any distress. Peace be with you, and with your permission, I shall return here for greens as they are needed, because according to my master, no estate has better salad greens than this one." "Come back as often as you like," responded Marato. "My daughter did not say what she did because you or any other Christian troubled her. She became confused, and instead of saying that the Turks should leave, she said you should go. Or perhaps she thought it was time for you to gather your greens." This was when I took my leave of both of them. Looking as if her heart would break, she went off with her father, while I, pretending to pick salad greens, walked all around the estate, looking carefully at the entrances and exits, and at the house's fortifications, and thinking how all of it could be used to further our scheme. Having done this, I returned to the renegade and my companions, and told them everything that had happened, saying that I longed for the moment when I could enjoy, without fear, the great happiness that fortune had granted me in the person of the lovely and beautiful Zoraida. Time paused. Time passed, and finally the day and hour we longed for arrival, and by following the plan and procedure that, after careful consideration and long discussion, we had all agreed upon, we had the good fortune we wished for. On the Friday following the day on which I spoke to Zoraida on the estate, our renegade anchored the boat at nightfall across from the place where the fair Zoraida was staying. The Christians who would row had already been alerted and were hiding in various spots throughout the surrounding area. They were all impatient and excited as they waited for me, and longed to storm the boat that lay before their eyes, for they knew nothing of the renegade's arrangement, and thought they would have to win their freedom by force of arms, killing the Moors on board. As soon as I and my companions showed ourselves, all the other Christians came out of hiding. By now the city gates had been closed, and not a soul was to be seen in the surrounding countryside. Since we were all together, we wondered what we should do first: go for Zoraida, or subdue the Moorish oarsmen. As we were discussing this, our renegade approached and asked why we were waiting. The time had come. His Moors were not on their guard, and most were asleep. We told him why we were hesitating, and he said the most important thing was to take over the ship, which could be done very easily and with absolutely no danger. And then we could go for Zoraida. Everything he said seemed to be good advice, and so, without further delay, and with him as our guide, we reached the boat. He boarded it first, held up his scimitar, and said in Moorish, "None of you move unless you want to lose your life." By this time almost all the Christians had come on board. The Moors, who were not very courageous, were frightened when they heard their captain speak in that manner, and none of them reached for weapons, for they had very few, if any at all. Without a word they allowed the Christians to tie their hands, which they did very quickly, threatening the Moors that if they raised any kind of alarm or called out in any way, they would all be put to the sword. When this was done, half our men remained on guard, and the renegade again acted as our guide, and we went to the estate of Agi Morado. It was our good fortune that when we opened the gate, it opened as easily as if it had never been locked, and so, very quietly and very silently, we approached the house without being detected by anyone. The beautiful Zoraida was waiting for us at a window, and as soon as she heard people moving about, she asked in a quiet voice if we were Nizarini, which was the same as asking if we were Christians. I replied that we were, and that she should come down. When she recognized my voice, she did not hesitate for an instant. Without a word she came down, opened the door, and allowed everyone to see her, so beautifully and richly dressed that I am incapable of describing her. As soon as I saw her, I grasped her hand and began to kiss it, and the renegade and my two comrades did the same. The others, who knew nothing of the matter, did what they saw us doing, which seemed to be nothing more than thanking her for our freedom and recognizing her as our lady and mistress. The renegade asked in the Moorish tongue if her father was in the house. She replied that he was, and that he was sleeping. Very sneaky. Then we will have to wake him, responded the renegade, and take him with us, along with everything of value on this beautiful estate. No, she said, my father is not to be touched in any way. In this house there is nothing of value except what I am carrying, and that is so valuable it will make you all rich and happy. Just wait a moment, and you will see. At this she went back into the house, saying that she would return very soon, and she would be quiet and not make any noise. I asked the renegade what had passed between them, and when he told me, I said that nothing was to be done except what Zoraida wished. Then she returned holding a chest filled with so many gold escudos that she could barely carry it. As bad luck would have it, her father awoke and heard the noise outside. He looked out the window, and seeing that all the men there were Christians, he began to shout in an extremely loud voice, crying out in Arabic, "Christians! Christians! Thieves! Thieves!" These shouts caused us all the greatest confusion and fear, seeing the danger in which we all were, and knowing how important it was to complete our business before anyone heard him. The renegade, together with some of our men, hurried up to where Murata was standing, but I did not dare abandon Zoraida, who had fainted into my arms. In brief, those who ran upstairs had such good luck that in a moment they came down again with Agi Murado. his hands tied and a handkerchief covering his mouth, which did not allow him to say a word. Still, they threatened him that if he made a sound, it would cost him his life. When his daughter saw him, she covered her eyes so that she would not see him, and her father was horrified, not realizing how willingly she had placed herself in our hands. But just then we had more need for our feet, and cautiously and quickly we boarded the ship. Those who had remained on board were waiting in fear that some devil had befallen us. Barely 2 hours of the evening had passed, and we were all in our boat. Zoraida's father's hands were bound, and the cloth removed from his mouth, and the renegade told him again that if he said a word, he would be killed. But when he saw his daughter there, he began to sigh most piteously, especially when he saw that I held her in a close embrace, and that she did not struggle, or protest, or shy away, but remained calm. Even so, he was silent, fearful the renegade's many threats might be carried out. When Zoraida came on board and saw that we were ready to put our oars into the water, and that her father and the rest of the Moors were prisoners, she told the renegade to tell me to be so kind as to release those Moors and free her father, because she would throw herself into the ocean rather than see her own eyes the father who had loved her taken prisoner on her account. The renegade told me what she said, and I responded that I was happy to comply, but he said it was not a good idea. If we left the Moors behind, they would summon the people and alert the city, and they would come after us in fast-moving corvettes and cut us off on land and on sea so that we could not escape. What we could do was set them free in the first Christian land we reached. We all agreed to this, and Zoraida, too, was satisfied when she was told the reasons why we did not wish to comply immediately with her request. Then, in contented silence and with joyous effort, our valiant oarsmen picked up their oars and, commending ourselves with our hearts to God, we began to row towards the islands of Mallorca, the closest Christian land. But because the north wind began to blow and the sea became somewhat rough, it was not possible to stay on course for Mallorca, and we had to follow the coast toward Oran, very fearful that we would be discovered at Sargal, which is about 60 miles along the coast from Algiers. But by the same token, we were afraid of running across one of the galleys that ordinarily carry merchandise from Tetuan along that route, though all of us, together and separately, assumed that if we encountered a merchant galley, as long as it was not one of those that made raids, we not only would not be defeated, but would capture a ship in which we could finish our voyage more safely. Just, throwing them in the water. No, just oars. For now. All right. This is a long chapter. It's a long story. Just checking. As we were rowing, Zoraida hid her head in my arms so as not to see her father, and I could hear her calling on Leila Merien to help us. We had gone some 30 nautical miles when Dawn found us approximately 3 harquebus shots from shore. I don't know what that means. You're very correct, Star. These older novels will absolutely do that. I'm gonna see what this wild word is, if I can find it again. Harquebus. An obsolete matchlock firearm. Obviously. Obviously, that's what that is. We had gone some 30 nautical miles when Dawn found us approximately 3 harquebus shots from shore, which we saw was uninhabited, with no one who could observe us. Even so, we made a great effort to row farther out to sea, which by this time was somewhat calmer. When we had gone almost 2 leagues, the order was given that only every 4th man should row, while the others had something to eat, for the ship was well provisioned. But the oarsmen said that this was not the time to rest, and those who were not rowing could feed them, for they did not wish to drop oars for any other reason whatsoever. This is what we did. But then a quarter wind began to blow, which obliged us to raise sails and stop rowing and head for Oran, since no other direction was possible. All of this was done very quickly, and under sail we traveled at more than 8 knots, and our only fear was meeting a pirate ship. We gave our Moorish oarsmen food, and the renegade comforted them by saying they were not prisoners and would be set free at the first opportunity. He said the same thing to Zoraida's father, who responded, "I might hope and believe nothing else of your liberality and good nature, O Christians, but do not think me so simple as to imagine that you will give me my freedom, for you never would have risked taking it from me, only to return it so generously, especially since you know who I am and the profit you can earn by giving it back to me. If you wish to name a price, here and now I offer you anything you wish for myself and this unfortunate daughter of mine, or if you prefer, for her alone, for she is the greatest and best part of my soul." When he said this, he began to weep so bitterly that he moved us all to compassion and forced Zoraida to look at him. When she saw him weep, she felt so much pity that she stood, moved away from me, and went to embrace her father. She put her face next to his, and the two of them began so piteous a weeping that many of us wept with them. But when her father saw her dressed in the finery and wearing so many jewels, he said to her in their language, "What is this, daughter? Last night, before this terrible misfortune occurred, I saw you wearing your ordinary house clothes, and now, though you did not have time to put on these garments, and did not receive any joyful news that had to be celebrated by dressing yourself so elegantly, I see you wearing the finest clothes I could give you when fortune was more favorable to us. Answer me, for this is even more disturbing and surprising to me than the calamity in which I find myself now." Everything that the Moor said to his daughter, the renegade translated for us, but she did not utter a word in reply. When her father saw at one side of the ship the small chest where she kept her jewels, which he knew very well he had left in Algiers and had not brought to this country estate, he was even more distraught, and he asked her how that chest had fallen into our hands and what it contained, to which the renegade replied, not waiting for Zoraida's answer, "Do not bother, senor, to ask your daughter, Zoraida, so many questions, because one answer I can satisfy them all. I want you to know that she is a Christian, and has been the file of our chains and the key to our prison. She is here voluntarily, and I imagine, is as happy to be here as one who comes out of darkness into light, out of death into life, out of suffering into glory." "Is what he say true, daughter?" asked the Moor. "It is," responded Zoraida. "Then," replied the old man, "you really are a Christian, and have placed your father in the hands of his enemies?" To which Zoraida responded, "It is true that I am a Christian, but not that I brought you this difficulty, for my desire never was to leave you or to do you harm, but only to do good for you. And what good have you done for yourself, daughter?" "That," she replied, "you must ask Lela Marienne. She will be able to answer you better than I can." As soon as the Moor heard this, he threw himself, with incredible speed, head first into the ocean, and he surely would have drowned if the long, heavy clothes he wore had not kept him above water for a while. Zoraida cried that we should rescue him. We all came to his aid, seizing him by his long robe and pulling him out, half drowned and unconscious. which caused Zoraida so much sorrow that she began to weep over him with heartfelt and mournful tears, as if he were already dead. We turned him face down. He coughed up a good deal of water, and in 2 hours he regained consciousness. During that time the wind changed and drove us back towards shore, and we had to use our oars again to keep from running aground. But it was our good fortune to reach a cove beside a small promontory cape that the Moors called the Cava Rumia, which in our language means the wicked Christian woman. It is a tradition among the Moors that this is the place where the Cava, who caused the loss of Spain, lies buried. Because Cava in their language means wicked woman, and the Rumia means Christian, they still take it as an evil omen when a ship is forced to anchor there, because otherwise they would never do so. But for us it was not the shelter of a wicked woman, but a safe haven and refuge, for the sea had become very rough. And there is a note after caused the loss of Spain lies buried, and it says, this is an allusion to the legend of Don Rodrigo, the last Visigothic ruler of Spain, whose illicit love for Florinda, the daughter of Count Julian, caused her father to seek his revenge by betraying Spain to the Moors at the Battle of Guadalete in 711. Not sure if you like the book so far. Yes. It's not bad. Just don't know if you like it. That's fair. That's fair. Let's see if I can find my spot. There we are. We posted sentries on shore, and not laying down our oars, we ate the food that the renegade had provisioned, and prayed with all our hearts to God and Our Lady that they help and favor us, and allow us to bring a happy conclusion what had begun so auspiciously. At Zoraida's heartfelt request, the order was given for her father and the other Moors, all of whom were bound, to be put ashore, because she did not have the courage and was too tender-hearted to see her father bound and her countrymen prisoners. We promised her that we would when we departed, for there would be no danger to us if we left them in that uninhabited place. Our prayers were not in vain. Heaven heard them, and a favorable wind began to blow, and the sea grew calm, inviting us to rejoice and resume our voyage. When we saw this, we untied the Moors, and one by one we put them ashore, which astounded them. But when it was time for Zoraida's father, who by now was fully conscious, to disembark, he said, Christians, why do you think this perverse female wants you to give me my freedom? Do you think it is because she feels compassion for me? No, of course not. She has done this because my presence will be a hindrance to her when she decides to put her evil desires into effect. Do not think she has been moved to change her religion because she believes yours is superior to ours, but only because she knows that in your country there is more lewd behavior than in ours. And turning to Zoraida, while I and another Christian held his arms in the event he attempted something rash, he said to her, Oh, shameless maiden, misguided girl, where are you going, blindly and thoughtlessly, in the power of these dogs, our natural enemies? Cursed be the hour I begot you, and cursed be the comfort and luxury in which I reared you. But seeing that he did not appear likely to finish any time soon, I hurried to put him ashore, and from there he continued to shout his curses and laments, praying to Muhammad to ask Allah to destroy us, to confound and exterminate us. When we had set sail and could no longer hear his words, we could see his actions. He pulled at his beard and tore out his hair and threw himself on the ground, and once, when he called as loud as he could, we heard him cry, Come back, my beloved daughter, come ashore. I forgive everything. Give those men the money. It is already theirs, and come and console your grieving father, who will die on this desolate strand if you leave him." Zoraida heard all of this, and she grieved and wept at everything, and could only respond, "Pray to Allah, dear father, that Layla Marian, who is the reason I am a Christian, may console you in your sorrow. Allah knows I could not help doing what I did, and these Christians owe me nothing for my decision, for even if I had chosen not to go with them and to remain in my own house, it would have been impossible for me to do so, given the burning desire in my soul to do this deed that seems as virtuous to me, my beloved father, as it appears wicked to you." She said this when her father could not hear her, and we could no longer see him. I comforted Zoraida, and we concentrated on our journey, which the wind so favored that we were certain we would be on the coast of Spain by dawn the next day. But since the good rarely, if ever, comes to us pure and simple, but is usually accompanied or followed by some disquieting, disturbing evil, it was our bad fortune, or perhaps the result of the curses the Moor had hurled at his daughter, for a father's curses, no matter who he may be, are always to be feared. In any case, when we were out at the open sea, and almost 3 hours of the night had gone by, and we were running under full sail and had shipped our oars because the brisk wind meant we did not need them, in the bright moonlight we saw a square, rigged ship very close to us, and all her sails unfurled and heading slightly into the wind. She crossed in front of us, so closely that we were obliged to shorten our sail in order not to ram her, and they had to turn hard on the wheel to give us room to pass. They had gathered on the deck of their vessel to ask us who we were, and where we were going, and where we had come from. But since they asked their questions in French, our renegade said, "No one should answer them, for they are surely French pirates, and they plunder everything they come across." Because of this warning, no one said a word, and when we had moved a little ahead of them, and they were leeward of us, without warning they fired 2 cannon, apparently loaded with chain shot, for the first cut our mast in two, and it and the sail fell into the sea, and a moment later the second was fired, hitting us amidship, so that the entire side of the vessel was blown apart, though it suffered no other damage. But we found ourselves sinking, and we all began to shout, calling for help and imploring those on the other ship to rescue us before we drowned. Then they shortened their sails and lowered a skiff, or small boat, into the water, and 12 Frenchmen got in, well armed with harquebuses, and holding flaming torches, and pulled alongside us. Seeing how few of us there were, and that our ship was sinking, they rescued us, saying that this had happened because of our discourtesy and not answering them. Our renegade picked up the chest of Zoraida's treasure and threw it into the sea without anyone noticing what he was doing. In short, when we were all on board the French ship, and they had learned everything they wanted to know about us, as if they were our mortal enemies, they stole everything we had, and stripped Zoraida even of the anklets she wore on her feet. But I was not as perturbed by Zoraida's distress as I was by my own fear that after they had taken her rich and precious jewels, they would take her most valuable jewel, the one she prized most highly. The desires of those people do not go beyond money, for which their lust is never satisfied, and on this occasion it was so inflamed that they would have taken even our captive's attire if it had been of any use to them. Some were of the opinion that they should throw us all overboard, wrapped in a sail, because they intended to trade at certain Spanish ports, claiming to be Bretons, and if they took us with them, they would be punished when their theft of our goods was discovered. But their captain, the man who had robbed my dear Zoraida, said that he was satisfied with the booty he already had, and did not wish to go to any Spanish port, but only to pass through the Straits of Gibraltar at night, or any way he could, and returned to La Rochelle, which was the place he had sailed from, and so they agreed to give us the skiff, and whatever we needed for the short journey that still lay before us, which is what they did the following day when we were within sight of the coast of Spain. At that sight all our sorrows and hardships were forgotten, as if they had never existed. So great is the joy one feels at regaining lost freedom. It must have been midday when they put us in the boat, giving us 2 barrels of water and some hard tack, and as the beautiful Zoraida was getting into the skiff, the captain, moved by some sort of mercy, gave her 40 gold escudos, and would not allow his men to take the very clothing she is wearing now. We climbed into the boat and thanked them for their kindness, displaying more gratitude than ill humor. They sailed away heading for the straits, and we, with no star other than the land we saw before us, began rowing so quickly that, as the sun began to set, we were so close to shore that we were certain we could touch land before nightfall. But since there was no moon, and the sky looked black, we did not know precisely where we were. It did not seem safe to rush straight for the coast, as many of us wanted to do, saying that we should go ashore even if there were rocks, and we landed in an uninhabited spot, for if we did, we would ally the reasonable fear that we might encounter the ships of pirates of Taiwan, who leave Barbary in the dark, reach the coast of Spain at dawn, make their raids, and return to sleep in their own houses at night. After long discussion, we finally decided to approach the coast slowly, and if the sea was calm enough, to put ashore wherever we could. This is what we did, and it must have been just before midnight when we reached the foot of a very high hill set back far enough from the sea so that we had room to land. We ran the boat onto the sand, climbed out onto land, kissed the ground, and with tears of sheer joy gave thanks to the Lord our God for his incomparable goodness to us. We took the provisions out of the skiff, pulled it onto land, then climbed a good way up the hill, for we still were not certain and could not really believe that we were standing on Christian soil. Day broke more slowly, I thought, than we wished. We climbed to the top of the hill to see if we could discover a village or some shepherds' huts. But though we looked in every direction, we saw no village, person, path, or road. Even so, we resolved to continue inland, for we were bound to meet someone soon who could tell us where we were. What most troubled me was seeing Zoraida walking on that harsh terrain, and though I carried her on my shoulders for a time, she was more wearied by my weariness than rested by the rest I gave her. She would not allow me to take up that burden again, and with a good deal of patience and many displays of joy, and with me leading her by the hand, we must have walked a little less than a quarter of a league when the sound of a small bell reached our ears, a clear sign that a flock was nearby. All of us looked around for it, and at the foot of a cork tree we saw a young shepherd taking his ease and idly whittling a stick with his knife. We called to him, and he looked up and then quickly scrambled to his feet, for, as we learned later, the first people he saw were the renegade and Zoraida, and since they were wearing Moorish clothing, he thought that all of Barbary was attacking, and running with extraordinary speed toward the woods that lay ahead of us, he began to shout at the top of his voice, calling, "Moors! Moors have landed! Moors, to arms! To arms!" His shouts confused us, and we did not know what to do, but assuming that the shepherd's outcry would rouse the countryside, and that the mounted troops who guarded the coast would soon come to investigate, we agreed that the renegade should remove his Turkish jacket and put on a prisoner's coat or tunic that one of us gave to him, though doing so left him in shirt sleeves, and so, commending ourselves to God, we followed the same path the shepherd had taken, expecting the mounted troops to bear down on us at any moment. And we were not wrong, because in less than 2 hours, when we had come out of the undergrowth and onto a plain, we saw some 50 men on horseback coming toward us at a quick trot. As soon as we saw them, we stood still and waited for them. But when they rode up and saw so many Christians instead of the Moors they had been searching for, they were perplexed, and one of them asked if we, by chance, were the reason a shepherd had sounded the alarm. I said that we were, and as I was about to tell him our story, where we came from and who we were, one of the Christians who was with us recognized the rider who had asked us the question, and without allowing me to utter another word, he said, "Give thanks to God, senores, for leading us to so good a place. If I'm not mistaken, we're in Vélez, Malaga, and if the years of my captivity haven't erased the memory of this gentleman who is questioning us, you, senor, are my uncle, Pedro de Bustamante." As soon as the Christian captive said this, the rider leaped from his horse and rushed to embrace the lad, saying, "My dear, dear nephew, I recognize you now, and have wept for your death, as has your mother, my sister, and all your family, those who are still alive, and God has been pleased to give them life so that they can have the pleasure of seeing you. We knew you were in Algiers, and to judge by the clothes you and the rest of the company are wearing, I understand that you've had a miraculous escape." "That's true," said the young man, "and there will be time to tell you all about this." As soon as the horsemen realized that we were Christian captives, they dismounted, and each of them invited us to ride his horse onto the city of Vélez, Malaga, which was a league and a half away. We told them where we had left the skiff, and some went back to bring it into the city. Others had us mount behind them, and Zoraida rode with the Christian captive's uncle. The entire city came out to welcome us, for they had been informed of our arrival by a guard who had ridden ahead. They were not surprised to see escaped captives, or captives who were Moors, because all the people along that coast were accustomed to seeing both, but they were astonished by Zoraida's beauty. At that time and moment it was at its height, due to the exertion of the trip and her joy at finding herself in a Christian land, free of the fear that we would be lost. This had brought so much color to her face that, unless I was deceived by my affections, I would dare say there was no more beautiful creature in the world, at least not that I had seen. We went directly to the church to thank God for the mercy he had shown us, and as soon as Zoraida entered the church, she said there were faces there that resembled that of Lela Merien. We told her these were images of Lela Merien, and the renegade did the best he could to explain what they meant, so that she could worship them as if each one really were the Lela Merien who had spoken to her. Zoraida, who had a good understanding and a quick, clear intelligence, quickly comprehended everything he said about the images. From the church our companions were taken to various houses in town, but the renegade, Zoraida, and I were taken by the Christian lad to the house of his parents, who were comfortably endowed with material goods, and who treated us as lovingly as they did their own son. We spent 6 days in Vélez, and at the end of that time, the renegade, having made the statement required of him, went to the city of Granada, where, through the meditation of the Holy Inquisition, he would be returned to the blessed fellowship of the Church. Each of the freed Christians went wherever he chose. Only Zoraida and I remained, with nothing but the escudos and the courteous Frenchman who had given it to her. And with them I bought this animal that she is riding. I have been serving her as father and squire, but not as husband, and we are going to see if my father is still alive, or if either of my brothers has been more fortunate than I, although since heaven made me Zoraida's companion, I do not believe I could have any better luck. The patience with which Zoraida endures the hardships that poverty brings, and her desire to at last become a Christian, are both so great that I am amazed and moved to serve her all the rest of my days. Yet the pleasure I have known I have in knowing that I am hers and she is mine is troubled and undone by my not knowing if I will find some corner in my own land where I shall shelter and protect her, or if time and death will have so altered the fortunes and lives of my father and brothers that if they are gone, I will scarcely find anyone who knows me. There is no more, señores, of my story to tell you. You can judge for yourself if it is unusual and interesting. As for me, I can say that though I would have liked to recount it more briefly, fear of tiring you made me omit more than a few details. End of chapter 41. So we got the full story. Excellent. Yeah, I can see. I do want more from, at this moment, Don Quixote and Sancho Panza. And it does definitely break down the momentum of their story and of going back to their village to even see like what's happening, you know? So it's, I understand that criticism, and I am hoping that it comes back later in a story or with more connections with people. We shall see. You know, we shall see. And Noodles, I totally understand that it's not a bad book, but not fully knowing if you are in liking it. I get that. I understand. So, we absolutely do not have time for another chapter. 6 minutes? Definitely not. Well, no, we don't. I was like, the next chapter is definitely much shorter, but we still will not finish in that time. So that is going to be where we end today. So we are ending at chapter 42 on page 368. Um, we are kind of close to the end of part one. The it starts, let's see, I did find it. Okay. So we have this much left for part one. So, not terrible. We're getting there. We're just chugging along. But yes, that is going to be it for tonight. We will be continuing right where we left off very soon. Um, I hope you all have a great night. I hope you are enjoying that the sun is out later than usual, which is, or not later than usual, but later than our winter months. But that's going to be it. Thank you all so much for being here. As always, whether you lurk, whether you chat, I 1000% appreciate your support and I appreciate you. Thank you so much, and I will see you very soon.